What if I told you that the people who hurt you the most might be the ones who seem the kindest? That behind every charming smile, every loving gesture could hide a calculated strategy to control your mind, one you don't even realize is happening. Tonight, we pull back the curtain on manipulation so subtle, it rewrites your reality. From gaslighting to guilt tripping, love bombing to silent treatment, this isn't just psychology, it's survival. Stay with me until the end, because by the time we're done, you'll never look at certain relationships the same way again. Gaslighting, rewriting your reality. Imagine waking up one day to find that everything you believed to be true, every memory you held dear, every instinct you trusted, suddenly feels like a lie. Your mind begins to doubt itself, your certainty fades, and the world around you becomes a confusing, shifting maze. This is the terrifying experience known as gaslighting, a dark psychological manipulation designed to rewrite your reality. Gaslighting is a term that originated from a 1944 film called Gaslight, where a husband gradually manipulates his wife into questioning her sanity. Since then, the concept has become a powerful way to describe a form of emotional abuse that leaves victims feeling lost in their own minds. The gaslighter's goal? To gain control by destabilizing your perception of reality, making you dependent on their version of events. At its core, gaslighting is a slow-burning process. It's not a single, cruel act, but a series of subtle, calculated moves that chip away at your confidence. It might start with a simple denial, "I never said that," or "you're just remembering it wrong." Over time, these small seeds of doubt grow into a forest of confusion. You start to question your judgments, your memories, even your sanity. One of the darkest aspects of gaslighting is how it exploits your mind's trust. Your brain naturally wants to believe you, that your senses can be trusted, that your memories are accurate. A gaslighter weaponizes this trust. They twist facts, lie boldly, and rewrite history, all while acting utterly convinced that they are right. This unwavering confidence makes it nearly impossible to argue, because it feels like you're battling not just a person, but your own mind. Gaslighters often use what we call projection. This means accusing you of things they themselves are guilty of. If they are lying, they call you a liar. If they're being deceitful, they say you're the one who can't be trusted. This tactic serves a dual purpose. It deflects blame and deepens your confusion. Suddenly, you're unsure who the real problem is, you or them. The manipulation is often cloaked in affection, concern, or humor. They might say, "I'm just trying to help you," or "Can't you take a joke?" Gaslighting rarely comes with a warning sign or obvious hostility. Instead, it's subtle, insidious, like poison slowly seeping into your mind. You might find yourself apologizing constantly, afraid to express your feelings, or doubting your perceptions more and more. This form of abuse thrives in close relationships, partners, family members, close friends, even employers. The gaslighter needs proximity to have their effect. They don't want someone on the outside telling you what's really happening. Isolation is a key part of the process. By making you distrust your own mind, they ensure you rely on them for the truth. Over time, victims often experience increased anxiety and depression. The once vibrant confidence dims into self-doubt and insecurity. Gaslighting can leave deep scars, emotional wounds that don't heal easily. Because the abuser has attacked the foundation of your identity, your reality, recognizing gaslighting is the crucial first step in escaping its grip. Pay attention to these red flags. Frequent denial of your experiences, being told you're too sensitive or crazy, feeling confused about what's real, second-guessing yourself frequently, and noticing that your self-esteem is slipping away. It's also important to document your experiences. Keep a journal of conversations, incidents, and feelings. This written record can serve as a lifeline to your truth when your mind begins to betray you. External validation, talking to trusted friends, therapists, or support groups, can provide perspective and help rebuild your sense of reality. Remember, Gaslighting is not about ordinary disagreements or misunderstandings. It's deliberate and repetitive psychological abuse meant to control and dominate. The gaslighter wants power over your mind because, in doing so, they gain power over you. But your mind is stronger than the lies fed to it. There is hope, and there is a way out. Empower yourself with knowledge. Understand that your feelings are valid, your memories are real, and your perceptions matter. Trust your instincts. You do not have to accept the distorted reality being imposed on you. Seeking help from professionals who understand gaslighting, trauma is vital for healing. Recovery will not happen overnight. It involves rebuilding trust in yourself and relearning to set firm boundaries. It means rejecting the false narrative forced upon you and reclaiming your story. Gaslighting attempts to trap you in a mental prison, but the key to freedom lies within your awareness and courage to fight back. In dark psychology, gaslighting is one of the most potent weapons wielded by those who seek control by undermining the very essence of truth. The knowledge of how it works is power, power to protect yourself and others. Machiavellian puppet masters. In the shadowy corridors of human interaction, there exist those who wield influence not with outright force, but with subtlety. They pull strings unseen, guiding thoughts and actions like puppeteers behind a darkened stage. These are the Machiavellian puppet masters, masters of manipulation whose power lies not in what they say, but in how they make others feel, think, and act. Today, we explore the dark corners of the human psyche, diving deep into the unsettling world of Machiavellianism and unraveling the secrets of those who move others like pieces on a chessboard. The term Machiavellian stems from Niccolò Machiavelli, a 16th century political philosopher whose book The Prince advised rulers to use cunning, deceit, and ruthless pragmatism to maintain power. In psychological terms, Machiavellianism describes a personality trait characterized by manipulation, emotional coldness, and a cynical worldview. Individuals with high Machiavellian traits excel at exploiting others' weaknesses, often cloaking their intentions beneath charming facades. They are not driven by emotion, but by strategic calculation, seeing human relationships as opportunities for control. What sets Machiavellian puppet masters apart is their unparalleled ability to understand human nature, our desires, fears, and vulnerabilities. They study us like a master chess player analyzes an opponent, always planning several moves ahead. Unlike overtly aggressive personalities, these manipulators prefer to stay in the shadows. They rarely confront directly. Instead, they craft situations where others willingly follow their lead, often unaware they are being controlled. One of the most powerful tools in the Machiavellian arsenal is emotional manipulation. These puppet masters excel at creating emotional illusions, weaving webs of trust and dependence. They can inspire feelings of loyalty, guilt, or fear, twisting emotional responses to serve their own ends. This emotional puppeteering can be subtle, an offhand compliment here, a calculated withdrawal of affection there, or profound, involving psychological games that undermine the victim's sense of self. Gaslighting is perhaps the darkest and most infamous technique in their repertoire. This insidious form of psychological abuse involves manipulating a person into doubting their own perceptions, memories, and even sanity. By consistently denying facts or twisting reality, the puppet master gains control over the victim's grasp on the truth. Over time, the victim becomes reliant on the manipulator's version of reality, effectively trapped within a mental prison constructed by the puppet master's hands. But manipulation is not just about breaking others down, it's also about building power through influence. Machiavellian puppet masters are skilled actors who often present multiple masks to suit different situations. In public, they may appear charming, charismatic, even benevolent. Behind closed doors, however, they may be calculating, ruthless, and cold. This duality allows them to infiltrate social circles, climb organizational ladders, and embed themselves in communities where they can quietly extend their control. Understanding the psychology behind this manipulation requires us to examine empathy, or rather the lack thereof. High Machiavellian individuals often exhibit low emotional empathy. They do not genuinely feel others' pain, but understand it intellectually and exploit it strategically. This detached calculation enables them to manipulate without remorse. It also allows them to maintain a facade of normalcy, even likability, making detection difficult. The impact on victims is profound and often long-lasting. Those ensnared by Machiavellian puppet masters frequently experience erosion of self-esteem, anxiety, and confusion. They may question their own judgment for years, haunted by the puppeteer's invisible strings. Relationships deteriorate, trust fractures, and a lingering sense of vulnerability takes root. Victims often find themselves trapped in cycles of abuse without fully understanding the mechanism of control. Interestingly, Machiavellian traits are not confined to malicious individuals alone. In a complex social ecosystem, a degree of Machiavellianism can offer survival advantages. Negotiators, diplomats, and business leaders sometimes employ Machiavellian tactics to navigate power dynamics and achieve objectives. The line between strategic influence and manipulation can be thin and blurred. It is the intent and ethical boundaries that distinguish Machiavellian puppet masters from more benign uses of influence. Recognizing the signs of Machiavellian manipulation is the first step toward reclaiming control. These signs may include patterns of consistent deceit, manipulation of facts, emotional exploitation, and a persistent undermining of your sense of reality. Pay attention to inconsistencies in their stories, moments when they shift blame, or when you feel emotionally drained and confused after interactions. The subtle erosion of your confidence and autonomy is a red flag that unseen strings are at work. Countering a Machiavellian puppet master requires psychological awareness and firm boundaries. Strengthening self-awareness and trusting your intuition can help you detect when your perceptions are being manipulated. Setting clear limits, refusing to engage in manipulative games, and documenting interactions can disrupt their patterns. Most importantly, building a strong support network can provide perspective and validation, essential tools for breaking free from control. The allure of control is universal. Whether in intimate relationships, workplaces, or social groups, the desire to influence others is deeply embedded in human nature. Machiavellian puppet masters take this to an extreme, weaponizing influence to achieve personal gain regardless of cost. By understanding their methods and motives, we empower ourselves to recognize manipulation before it takes root, protecting our minds from becoming mere puppets in someone else's design. As we conclude this journey into the dark psychology of Machiavellianism, remember that knowledge is power. Recognizing the hidden forces at play in human interactions allows us to navigate the complex landscape of influence with clarity and resilience. The more we understand these puppet masters, their tactics, traits, and intentions, the better equipped we are to break free from their invisible strings and reclaim our autonomy. In a world where shadows often disguise true intentions, remain vigilant. Guard your perceptions and emotions carefully. Trust in your own mind's ability to discern truth from deception. And remember, no one can pull your strings unless you give them permission. The ultimate power lies within you, the power to choose, to see clearly, and to walk away from manipulation into the light of authentic freedom. Narcissistic supply and discard. Two concepts, often whispered about in the shadowy corners of dark psychology, they are keys to understanding how narcissists sustain their inflated egos and ultimately how they leave a trail of emotional wreckage behind them. Tonight, we dive deep into the cold, calculating mechanisms behind these processes, unraveling the chilling truths that lie beneath the surface of charm and manipulation. Prepare yourself for a journey into the mind of the narcissist, a journey that few dare to take. Narcissistic supply is the lifeblood of the narcissist. Imagine it as a fuel, essential, addictive, and insatiable. This supply isn't just praise or attention, it's a constant stream of validation that confirms the grandiose self-image the narcissist has constructed. Without it, their fragile sense of self teeters on the edge of collapse. Unlike healthy individuals who find self-esteem from within, narcissists depend entirely on external sources to shore up their sense of worth. This external validation can come in many forms: admiration, compliments, obedience, envy, or even fear. The need for narcissistic supply begins subtly. At first, it manifests in compliments and admiration from family, friends, or colleagues. But as time passes, the narcissist demands more attention, more affirmation, more control. They are masters of seduction, painting themselves as fascinating, charismatic, or even vulnerable to draw others in. The supply doesn't have to be positive all the time. It can also be negative attention. In fact, some narcissists even thrive on creating conflict or drama if it guarantees constant focus on them. What makes narcissistic supply truly sinister is its transactional nature. The narcissist takes without giving. Relationships become a one-sided game where one person provides unwavering attention and devotion while the other manipulates and drains. Feelings and needs of others are irrelevant. Only the narcissist's hunger for validation matters. This extraction of supply often leaves victims emotionally depleted, confused, and questioning their own reality. Behind the charming facade, narcissists use various tools to secure their supply. Flattery is an obvious tactic, but it's often laced with manipulation. They might compliment someone not because they genuinely admire them, but because they want something: influence, control, or simply to keep the supply flowing. Love bombing is another tactic, where excessive attention and affection are showered upon the target, creating an intense emotional bond that serves as a pipeline for supply. But what happens when the narcissistic supply begins to dry up? When the target starts to resist, question, or simply becomes less available? Here lies the cruel twist: the discard phase. Discard is the dark exit strategy the narcissist employs once a supply source no longer serves their purpose. It's not a gentle fading away or a peaceful breakup. No, discard is often brutal, demeaning, and designed to inflict maximum emotional damage. The discard can come suddenly or build up through escalating coldness and neglect. Suddenly, the person who was once the center of the narcissist's universe is cast aside as if they never mattered. This abrupt severing serves two purposes. First, it allows the narcissist to free themselves from a no longer useful source of supply. Second, it serves as a display of power, a reminder that the narcissist holds all the cards. During discard, the narcissist might lash out with insults, blame, or silent treatment. The victim is often left bewildered, replaying every interaction in their mind, searching for explanations that simply don't exist. This confusion is part of the narcissist's psychological game, ensuring the victim remains trapped in a loop of self-doubt and longing. Interestingly, some narcissists employ a pattern known as hoovering after discard. Just when the victim starts to move on, the narcissist reappears, sometimes with fake apologies, promises to change, or sudden acts of kindness. Hoovering is a manipulative tactic to suck the victim back into the cycle, reigniting the supply stream once more. But true change is rare, if not impossible, and the cycle of idealization, devaluation, discard, and hoovering ensnares its victims again and again. Understanding these cycles helps illuminate the narcissist's internal world, devoid of true empathy or genuine connection. Their relationships are tools, pawns to be used and discarded at whim, sustaining their fragile ego's illusions of superiority. This knowledge is not merely academic. It can be a beacon for those trapped in the narcissist's web, offering clarity amidst chaos. The psychology behind narcissistic supply and discard is rooted in early developmental wounds. Narcissists often emerge from environments where emotional needs were unmet or inconsistent. To cope with feelings of worthlessness or abandonment, they construct a grandiose self to mask deep insecurities. The supply they seek is a desperate attempt to fill an internal void. a void that no amount of external validation can ever truly heal. But while the narcissist's hunger is endless, the sources of supply are finite. People grow weary, boundaries strengthen, and the mask eventually slips. The resulting discard phase can be both psychologically damaging and, paradoxically, a rude awakening for victims. It exposes the transactional nature of their past relationship and forces a confrontation with painful truths. For those who have experienced the discard, the road to recovery is long and arduous. Healing requires not only emotional repair, but also a reevaluation of self-worth independent from the narcissist's influence. It demands learning to trust oneself again, rebuilding boundaries, and resisting the lure of hoovering tactics. Educating oneself on the dark psychological patterns at play can be a powerful step toward empowerment. In communities where dark psychology is openly discussed, the terms narcissistic supply and discard have become rallying points. They encapsulate the toxic dance of manipulation and abuse, shedding light on behaviors that are often hidden behind smiles and charm. The more this knowledge spreads, the harder it becomes for narcissists to operate unchecked. Dark psychology reminds us that behind the glamorous exterior often lies a cold predator, calculating every word and action to exploit vulnerabilities. Narcissistic supply and discard are mechanisms of control, tools used to dominate others emotionally and maintain a facade of grandeur. Awareness is the first line of defense. So how can one guard against falling victim to this cycle? Recognition is key. Noticing patterns of idealization followed by sudden devaluation or feeling constantly drained after interacting with someone can be early warning signs. Trusting intuition, seeking support, and setting firm boundaries are vital steps. Remember, no one owes their supply to a narcissist. Your attention and affection are precious resources, not currency to be exploited. In the end, narcissistic supply and discard unveil the cruel calculus of a manipulative mind. They teach us about the cost of unchecked ego and the importance of emotional sovereignty. They remind us that true validation must come from within, for no amount of external praise can substitute for self-love. The psychopath's charming mask. There is a dark truth hidden beneath the surface of many human interactions, a truth that often goes unnoticed, even by those who are closest to it. This truth is the existence of the psychopath's charming mask. Behind this mask lies a masterful deception, a carefully constructed facade designed to manipulate, exploit, and control. The psychopath's charm is not genuine warmth or kindness. Instead, it is a calculated performance, a tool wielded by one who understands human nature better than most. Today, we delve into the depths of this fascinating and terrifying aspect of dark psychology. At first glance, a psychopath can seem like the ideal companion. They are often witty, engaging, and magnetic. Their words flow smoothly, like honey dripping from a spoon. They listen attentively, or at least pretend to, making you feel seen in a way few others can. This charm is their weapon, a mask they wear to draw people in, to lower their defenses, and to win their trust. Once the mask is on, it becomes nearly impossible to see the cold, calculating mind hidden beneath. Psychopaths are incredibly skilled at reading people. They study body language, tone of voice, and emotional responses, almost like a scientist. This ability allows them to mimic social cues convincingly. When they smile, it may light up a room, but that smile masks an absence of genuine empathy. In fact, behind the charming eyes is a haunting emptiness, an emotional void that the psychopath cannot fill because, simply put, they do not experience emotions as others do. This absence of empathy is perhaps the most defining characteristic of psychopathy. Unlike us, who feel joy, sadness, guilt, or remorse, psychopaths are emotionally detached observers of the world. They see other people as mere objects or tools to achieve their goals. Their charm is a mask designed not to connect, but to manipulate. It is a skill refined through experience, practiced over countless interactions until it becomes second nature. One of the most chilling facts about the psychopath's charm is how effortlessly it enables them to infiltrate the closest circles. Many have been seduced by this mask: partners, friends, colleagues, even entire communities, drawing them in before slowly realizing the truth behind the facade. The psychopath rarely reveals their true self up front. It is a slow, insidious process, leaving their victims confused, hurt, and often shattered. Yet what makes this mask truly dangerous is its adaptability. Psychopaths tailor their charm to suit their audience. To one person, they might be a charismatic, caring confidant. To another, a powerful and assertive leader. This ability to shapeshift socially is rooted in a deep understanding of social dynamics and human psychology. They are not bound by genuine feelings, but driven by a sharp intent to manipulate outcomes in their favor. Behind the mask, the psychopath is a master planner. Their charm is the first step in a strategy designed to gain control. They may start with small favors, acts of kindness, or seemingly genuine displays of interest. This initial connection builds trust. Then, gradually, manipulation intensifies. Gaslighting, lying, and emotional manipulation follow, all concealed under that same charming exterior. Psychopaths are experts in gaslighting, a psychological tactic used to make others doubt their own perceptions and sanity. When confronted, they can deny facts with such conviction, it causes victims to question reality. Their charm plays a crucial role in this, because the victim once saw warmth and affection in the psychopath, betrayal and manipulation become all the more disorienting. Interestingly, the psychopath's charming mask also plays a role in their ability to avoid detection by law enforcement or those who seek justice. Their superficial charm often makes authorities hesitant to believe allegations against them. The psychopath can use courtrooms, interviews, and social media alike to portray themselves as victims or upstanding citizens. This skillful presentation of self helps them continue their destructive behaviors unchecked. It's also important to understand that not all psychopaths are violent criminals or sociopaths in the traditional sense. Many live quiet, seemingly successful lives: lawyers, doctors, corporate executives, politicians. Their charm helps them climb social ladders, blend seamlessly in society, and exploit systems for personal gain. Beneath their polished appearance lies a relentless drive toward power and control, unhampered by conscience. The psychopath's charm is almost hypnotic. Neuroscientific studies reveal that when people interact with a psychopath, brain activity linked to emotional processing decreases. This suggests that the charm works not because the victim is more trusting, but because their brain's natural alarm systems are dulled. The psychopath exploits this neurological loophole to slip past defenses. But how can one see through this mask? The first step is awareness, recognizing that charm is not always genuine. Pay attention to inconsistencies between words and actions. Does this person show empathy beyond surface-level gestures? Are their relationships marked by a pattern of broken trust, manipulation, or repeated betrayals? True warmth and connection come with vulnerability and reciprocity, not calculated displays. Boundary setting is critical when dealing with someone wearing this mask. Psychopaths test limits constantly, pushing until they find a weakness to exploit. They may charm their way back in after being pushed out, so maintaining clear and firm boundaries is essential. Do not mistake their persistence for genuine affection. Another dark psychology fact is how psychopaths use love bombing, the overwhelming showering of affection and attention in the early stages of relationship. This tactic is designed to create a rapid bond and dependency, leaving the victim emotionally hooked. Later, the mask slips, revealing the emptiness underneath, but by then the victim is often deeply entangled. The psychological damage inflicted by the psychopath's charming mask runs deep. Victims frequently suffer from lowered self-esteem, anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress. Their worldviews may become distorted, making it difficult to trust others again. Recovery is possible, but it takes time, support, and often professional help. It's important to reiterate that not everyone charming is a psychopath, and not all psychopaths are overtly charming. However, the presence of superficial charm, combined with manipulative tendencies, lack of empathy, and a pattern of exploitative behavior, is a strong indicator. Recognizing these signs can protect you and those you care about. For those who have encountered the psychopath's charming mask, healing often begins with reclaiming personal power. Understanding the nature of the deception removes much of its hold. Education about dark psychology can illuminate the path forward, shining light into what once felt like an impenetrable darkness. In the end, the psychopath's charm is a reminder that not all that glitters is gold. Beneath the sparkle, there can lurk cold calculation and ruthless intent. It is a mask designed to deceive, and once it slips, it reveals a chilling emptiness. Stay vigilant, trust your instincts, and remember, genuine connection is never cheap or effortless. It requires honesty, vulnerability, and mutual respect, qualities the psychopath's charming mask can only imitate, never embody. Intermittent reinforcement, addictive abuse. Intermittent reinforcement is a powerful psychological concept, one that lies at the core of many human behaviors, especially those linked to addiction and abuse. It's a term that might sound clinical or obscure, but its effects are profoundly real and devastating. The unsettling truth is that intermittent reinforcement can create compulsive patterns, binding individuals in cycles of hope, despair, and dependency, often without their conscious awareness. Today, we will unravel the dark psychology behind this phenomenon, revealing how intermittent reinforcement feeds addictive abuse, fueling some of the most destructive behaviors known to human existence. At its essence, intermittent reinforcement means delivering rewards or punishments in an unpredictable, inconsistent manner. Unlike continuous reinforcement, where every response is met with a reward, intermittent reinforcement offers the payoff only sometimes. This irregularity is crucial. It leverages our brain's craving for certainty and satisfaction, keeping us locked in a relentless pursuit of the next reward. The unpredictable nature of this system triggers a potent psychological effect. It intensifies motivation and encourages a persistence that is far more resistant to extinction than if rewards were given consistently. This insight into human behavior was famously demonstrated in experiments by psychologists B.F. Skinner and others. Using animals like pigeons or rats, they showed that when these creatures received rewards only occasionally and unpredictably, they would work harder and longer than when rewards were predictable and continuous. This principle applies equally to humans. Our brains react similarly, wired to hold on, to hope, and to chase intermittent rewards, even when those rewards are few and far between. In real life, intermittent reinforcement plays a dark role in many abusive and addictive scenarios. Consider the cycle of emotional abuse in a toxic relationship. The abuser might alternate between moments of warmth, affection, or kindness, and episodes of cruelty, neglect, or manipulation. This inconsistency keeps the victim off balance, constantly seeking to regain the abuser's favor. The unpredictable reward of love or approval becomes more potent precisely because it's so rare and fleeting. The victim becomes trapped in a psychological bind, willing to endure suffering for the chance of those elusive moments of connection. The truth: this mechanism also underlies many forms of addiction. Take gambling, for example. Slot machines are classic instruments designed around intermittent reinforcement schedules. The player never knows when the next payout will come. Sometimes winning is just around the corner, or so the mind convinces itself. This uncertainty fuels repeated engagement, the hope for a big win despite consistent losses. The variable rewards keep the gambler hooked, chasing highs that never last. It is a cruel dance, one rooted in the brain's compulsive need to predict and grasp reward. Another insidious manifestation of intermittent reinforcement appears in substance abuse. The experience of using drugs or alcohol is not always pleasurable or rewarding. Sometimes it might cause pain, discomfort, or even no noticeable effect. But when an individual experiences that rare and intense high, the unpredictable reward, it propels them back into use. The inconsistency rarely extinguishes the behavior. Instead, it strengthens the craving. The brain's dopamine system, so deeply involved in reward and motivation, becomes hijacked, fueling compulsive cycles that grow increasingly difficult to escape. But the trap of intermittent reinforcement extends even beyond addiction into the realm of manipulative social interactions. Psychopaths, narcissists, and other emotionally abusive individuals often use this tactic expertly. Their sporadic displays of approval or charm confuse and destabilize victims, making it difficult to accurately assess the relationship or respond effectively. The victim is conditioned to seek the abuser's reward, even as those moments are fleeting and followed by abuse. This pattern erodes self-esteem, fosters dependency, and maintains control in the hands of the abuser. The psychological toll of intermittent reinforcement in abusive contexts is heavy. Victims often report feeling like they're walking on eggshells, never knowing what to expect or how to behave to gain favor or avoid punishment. This unpredictability leads to heightened anxiety, hypervigilance, and chronic stress. Over time, the victim's sense of self becomes fragmented, their confidence shattered, and their will to resist weakened. This dynamic fuels a cycle of abuse that is incredibly challenging to break. The dark psychology of intermittent reinforcement also explains why so many people struggle with compulsive behaviors in the digital age. Social media platforms, mobile apps, and games are often designed to exploit this principle. Notifications, likes, comments, and messages come in sporadically, making engagement addictive. The intermittent nature of social rewards triggers dopamine release and keeps users scrolling, refreshing, and returning for more, hours slipping away without conscious realization. This manipulation of human psychology is subtle yet relentless, contributing to widespread issues of digital addiction and attention fragmentation. Understanding intermittent reinforcement is not just about recognizing why addiction and abuse are so powerful. It is also critical for recovery and healing. Breaking free from the grip of intermittent reinforcement requires much more than willpower alone. The brain has been conditioned, sometimes deeply, to persist through uncertainty and scarcity of reward. Recovery often demands restructuring one's environment, establishing consistent and predictable patterns, and retraining the brain to expect steadiness instead of unpredictability. Therapeutic approaches work to replace intermittent reinforcement cycles with healthier routines. In addiction treatment, for example, building support systems that consistently encourage positive behavior can counterbalance the unpredictable highs associated with substance use. In abusive relationships, counseling and support groups help victims recognize the manipulative patterns, rebuild self-worth, and develop strategies to establish stability. One of the most sinister aspects of intermittent reinforcement is its invisibility. People caught in these cycles rarely see the underlying process driving their behavior. They may blame themselves for weakness or misunderstand their suffering as simply bad luck. This is where education and awareness play a vital role. By exposing the mechanics of intermittent reinforcement and the dark psychology that exploits it, we empower individuals to recognize these patterns and take steps toward freedom. The neurological basis of intermittent reinforcement also highlights the difficulty of overcoming its effects. When the brain's reward system is repeatedly stimulated, but without predictability, it enhances neural pathways associated with desire and compulsion. This creates a form of learned helplessness in the face of uncertainty, where the craving is no longer just for the reward, but for the very act of pursuing the reward. The addiction to the anticipation itself can be as potent, if not more so, than the reward. This psychological trap forms the foundation of many abusive control tactics. Abusers understand, often implicitly, that unpredictability keeps their victims dependent and compliant, By granting affection, attention, or approval sporadically, they maintain power while fostering confusion and hope. This power dynamic is cruel and deliberate, inflicting long-term damage that extends well beyond immediate interactions. However, the story of intermittent reinforcement isn't solely one of despair. With understanding comes agency. Awareness of these psychological principles opens the door to deliberate change. Once the fog of unpredictability lifts, individuals can reclaim their autonomy. They can seek environments where responses are consistent, supportive, and predictable, where rewards do not come as cruel surprises, but as reliable affirmations. Moreover, those in positions of influence, whether therapists, educators, or policymakers, can use this insight to design better interventions and support systems. Recognizing the power of intermittent reinforcement allows for more effective treatments, prevention programs, and social structures that prioritize consistent positivity over intermittent manipulation. In the end, intermittent reinforcement reveals a profound truth about human behavior. Uncertainty is a powerful driver. It can motivate greatness, encouragement, and resilience, but in the wrong hands, it becomes a tool for manipulation, addiction, and abuse. Understanding this mechanism is key to unraveling many dark psychological webs that entangle individuals in suffering. If there is one takeaway from tonight's exploration of intermittent reinforcement and addictive abuse, it is this: the mind craves patterns, predictability, and safety. When denied these, it becomes vulnerable to exploitation. It is in these cracks, created by unpredictability and intermittent reward, that addiction and abuse thrive. But knowledge acts as light. By shining a light on these hidden dynamics, we empower ourselves and others to break free from destructive cycles and move toward healing. Remember, the power of intermittent reinforcement can shape behavior in profound ways, but humans are more than their impulses. Through understanding and support, reclaiming control over our responses is possible. The darkness of manipulation can be overcome by the light of awareness and consistent, healthy connection. Love bombing to trap you. Welcome to this deep dive into the shadowy world of manipulation, where affection is weaponized and kindness conceals control. Today, we're unraveling the dark psychological tactic known as love bombing, a dangerous ploy designed to trap you in a web of influence and deceit. Imagine meeting someone who showers you with overwhelming attention, relentless compliments, and grand declarations of affection. It feels like a dream, the perfect soulmate who seems too good to be true. That's precisely the point. Love bombing is a calculated psychological assault, a method used by manipulators to hook you quickly and deeply before you realize you're caught. At its core, love bombing is a form of emotional manipulation. It's not about genuine care or connection, but about creating an illusion so powerful that it overrides your critical thinking. The intense rush of validation and belonging triggers your brain's reward system, flooding you with dopamine and oxytocin, chemicals tied to pleasure and bonding. This biological high feels intoxicating, blinding you to red flags that would normally raise alarm. In the early phases, a love bomber will shower you with messages, gifts, and attention that border on obsessive. You become the center of their universe. They make you feel seen, valued, and adored, all at once. But beneath this facade lies a sinister motive: control. Why is love bombing so effective? Because it exploits a deep human need, the desire to be loved and accepted. When someone fills that emotional void with such intensity, it can feel impossible to walk away. The manipulator's strategy hinges on the rapid formation of an emotional bond, which they then use as leverage to influence your decisions, dampen your independence, and erode your boundaries. Dark psychology teaches us that love bombing is designed to disarm your defenses. The rush of affection acts like an emotional Trojan horse, sliding past your skepticism and trust barriers before you have a chance to think twice. Once you're emotionally entangled, the manipulator's real nature begins to surface. But by then, the damage is often done. What follows the love bombing phase is a gradual shift. The affection becomes conditional, unpredictable, and manipulative. You might notice the once constant attention dimming, replaced by criticism, guilt-tripping, or tests of your loyalty. These shifts are confusing and hurtful. They serve to destabilize your self-esteem and tether your sense of worth tightly to their approval. A hallmark of love bombing is its cyclical pattern. The manipulator alternates between affection and withdrawal, praise and punishment, closeness and distance. This emotional roller coaster fosters dependency. The highs are so intoxicating that you find yourself chasing the affection during the lows, desperate to return to that initial euphoria. Understanding the psychological mechanics behind love bombing can empower you to spot it before it ensnares you. Remember, genuine love and care develop gradually, with steady growth and mutual respect. When affection feels rushed, overwhelming, or too intense too soon, it's a warning sign. Manipulators often target those who are emotionally vulnerable. If you've experienced loneliness, self-doubt, or past trauma, the allure of someone who seems to complete you can be especially strong. Dark psychology exploits these wounds, feeding you exactly what you crave: affection, validation, and significance. But only as a prelude to control. One chilling aspect of love bombing is its use in various contexts beyond romantic relationships. Cult leaders, abusive partners, narcissists, and even some charismatic friends or colleagues can employ this tactic. In all cases, the objective remains the same: to create an intense emotional bond that can be exploited. Recognizing love bombing requires attentiveness to certain behaviors. Excessive compliments and flattery that feel insincere. Over-the-top gifts or grand gestures early on. Persistent and overwhelming communication, often multiple messages or calls a day. Rapid declarations of love or deep attachment. Attempts to isolate you by discrediting others or monopolizing your time. If you notice these patterns, it's crucial to pause and assess. Take the time you need to evaluate the relationship objectively, outside of the emotional rush. Trust your instincts. If something feels off or too good to be true, it probably is. One of the most dangerous aspects of love bombing is that it erodes your ability to set boundaries. The initial flood of affection conditions you to tolerate invasions into your privacy, dismiss your reservations, and rationalize problematic behavior. Over time, your sense of autonomy diminishes, and your identity may begin to revolve around pleasing the manipulator. This creates a fertile ground for deeper abuse. Once trapped, victims often find it challenging to break free, fearing abandonment or rejection. The manipulator exploits this fear, tightening their grip with threats, guilt, and emotional blackmail. So, how do you protect yourself? Maintain your own identity and interests, independent of the relationship. Set clear boundaries from the start and observe how they respond. Look for consistency in their words and actions over time. Seek support from trusted friends or family who can offer an outside perspective. Educate yourself about signs of manipulation and trust your emotional responses. Breaking free from love bombing requires courage and self-awareness. Remember, the intensity of early affection doesn't measure true love. Respect, patience, and mutual understanding do. As we've explored today, love bombing is a sinister psychological tactic designed to trap you through the illusion of love and affection. By understanding its mechanics, recognizing the signs, and nurturing your self-worth, you can safeguard yourself from becoming a victim of this manipulative trap. Fear, obligation, and guilt. 3 powerful psychological forces that silently govern human behavior. Together, they form what many experts call fog. This invisible trio shapes decisions, manipulates actions, and builds invisible prisons within the mind. Today, we will delve deep into the dark undercurrents of fog, uncovering how it operates, how it controls, and most importantly, how to recognize when you are caught in its web. Fear, the oldest and most primal of emotions, is designed to protect us. It alerts us to danger, activates our survival instincts, and keeps us alive. But fear is a double-edged sword. When misused or manipulated, it becomes a tool for control, a weapon that fractures confidence and autonomy. Fear can be the whisper in your mind telling you what you cannot do, the dread of consequences, or the imagined catastrophes that imprison you. Obligation, on the other hand, binds us socially and morally. It stems from the idea that we owe something to others, whether through promises, social roles, or perceived duties. Obligation is often seen as noble, a sign of responsibility and honor. Yet, when obligation is forced or exploited, it becomes a chain. It burdens the soul, demanding actions not from desire, but from compulsion, often leaving individuals feeling trapped and resentful. Guilt is the silent tormentor that shadows our conscience. It is the emotional penalty we pay for perceived wrongdoings or failures to meet expectations. Guilt acts like a psychological ballast, weighing heavily on self-esteem and decision-making. In the hands of manipulative forces, guilt is amplified to exert control, turning kindness into compliance and love into a prison. Together, fear, obligation, and guilt intertwine to create a fog, a murky psychological space where free will becomes clouded and manipulation thrives. This is why understanding fog is crucial. It helps peel back the layers of influence that shape our behavior from within, often without our awareness. Fear within the fog framework is not always obvious. It can hide behind subtle cues, such as social anxiety or the fear of disappointing others. Sometimes it masquerades as caution or respect, yet underneath lies an emotional grip waiting to be exploited. For instance, fear of rejection can compel someone to conform, even if it contradicts their true beliefs or desires. Fear of conflict can silence voices, creating a fertile ground for manipulation. Obligation fuels this process by providing a psychological hook. When people feel they must act a certain way out of duty, even against their will, a deep internal struggle begins. Obligation can be amplified by cultural, familial, or social norms, messages passed down and internalized, telling us this is what you must do. Manipulators understand this well. They encourage feelings of indebtedness, guilt, or responsibility, making others feel as though saying no is not an option. Guilt, the third element, is often the most potent catalyst. It can erode boundaries and self-worth faster than fear or obligation alone. Guilt's weapon is its intimate relation with self-identity and morality. When someone feels guilty, they often go to great lengths to make amends or avoid further emotional pain, even if the guilt is unwarranted or manufactured. Manipulators often induce guilt by highlighting sacrifices made, emphasizing harm caused by refusal, or reminding individuals of past favors. Fog is also deeply ingrained in psychological abuse dynamics. Gaslighting, for example, often leverages all three. Fear arises from confusion about reality. Obligation surfaces through demands for loyalty or forgiveness. Guilt is sowed by blaming victims for their suffering or the abuser's behavior. Over time, the victim feels helpless, a psychological prisoner lost within fog. It's easy to believe that such emotional exploitation happens only in extreme situations. The truth is, fog operates on a much broader scale. From toxic workplaces to dysfunctional families, from social media interactions to political discourse, fear, obligation, and guilt are used to manipulate opinions and behaviors every day. In relationships, fog can be especially destructive. Consider the phrase, "because I said so," often used to justify controlling behavior cloaked in obligation. This language silently reinforces power imbalances, feeding into a cycle of fear and guilt. A partner might fear losing affection or approval, feel obligated to comply with unreasonable demands, and then carry guilt for any resistance or perceived failure. Understanding fog also involves recognizing its role in social conditioning. From childhood, many are taught to obey authority figures, respect traditions, and conform to expectations. While some of this is necessary for societal functioning, unchecked, it becomes a breeding ground for fog, dulling critical thinking and trapping individuals in patterns of self-sacrifice and submission. Another insidious aspect of fog is its role in self-manipulation. Sometimes the most powerful chains are the ones we build ourselves. Internalized fear of failure or rejection, feelings of obligation toward others that rob us of time and energy, and self-directed guilt for perceived shortcomings all keep us stuck, unable to break free. This internal fog blurs lines between healthy responsibility and destructive martyrdom. But there is hope. Awareness is the first step in piercing through the fog. Recognizing these emotional forces as they arise, feeling fear without succumbing, understanding obligation without being enslaved, confronting guilt without self-punishment allows us to reclaim control. Strategies for overcoming fog begin with self-reflection. Ask yourself, where does this fear come from? Is it real or imagined? Evaluate the obligations you feel. Are they voluntary or imposed? And when guilt surfaces, examine whether it is justified or manipulated. Journaling these feelings helps bring clarity. Setting boundaries is also vital. Learning to say no without fear or guilt challenges the power of fog. It may be uncomfortable at first, but with practice, it strengthens self-respect and fosters healthier relationships. Surrounding yourself with supportive people who respect your autonomy further reduces fog's hold. In some cases, professional help is necessary. Therapists and counselors trained in trauma and abuse recovery can guide individuals through disentangling from fog, especially when it is deeply rooted. Healing from psychological manipulation often involves rebuilding trust in one's own judgment and emotions. Education about dark psychology, the study of human manipulation and control, is another powerful tool. By understanding how fear, obligation, and guilt are used to influence, you become less vulnerable. This knowledge fosters resilience, turning what once might have controlled you into mere background noise. It's also important to cultivate self-compassion. Guilt often thrives in harsh self-judgment. By treating yourself with kindness and understanding, you weaken guilt's grip and nurture a healthier internal dialogue. Mindfulness practices can support this, helping anchor awareness in the present and reduce anxiety and fear. Remember, fog thrives in the shadows, uncertainty, confusion, and emotional turmoil. Bringing these feelings into the light of conscious awareness diminishes their power. As with any form of psychological manipulation, the greatest defense is clarity of mind. In closing, fear, obligation, and guilt are not simply emotions to be avoided or suppressed. They are signals, messages from within that deserve attention. The challenge lies in discerning when these signals serve your well-being and when they serve others' agendas. When you can navigate this balance, you reclaim freedom from the fog. Guilt tripping, weaponized empathy. Guilt tripping, a subtle, often invisible weapon wielded with precision. It wraps itself around the psyche like a tightening noose, tightening ever so gradually until the victim struggles to breathe without first conceding to the manipulator's demands. This is no ordinary persuasion technique. This is weaponized empathy. At its core, empathy is a beautiful human trait, our innate ability to understand and share the feelings of another. It's what binds us together, fosters trust, and builds connection. But like any powerful tool, empathy can be twisted and distorted into a sinister force. Guilt tripping is the dark side of empathy, where compassion is weaponized to control, manipulate, and dominate. Imagine a scenario where someone close to you drops a simple comment, "I guess I'll just suffer quietly since you don't seem to care." On the surface, these words appear vulnerable, even self-pitying, but beneath lies the calculated use of empathy to trigger guilt. The implied message: your lack of care is causing their suffering. A heavy burden, isn't it? This is the essence of guilt tripping, a silent psychological assault that exploits your empathetic nature, making you feel responsible for another's pain. But what makes it so effective? Why does it feel almost impossible to brush off? The answer lies in our brain's wiring. Humans are inherently social creatures, hardwired to seek approval and avoid conflict. Guilt is a powerful emotion that reinforces social bonds by encouraging reparative actions. When guilt is wielded as a weapon, it bypasses rational thought, plunging you into an emotional pit where logic gives way to feelings of obligation and remorse. Manipulators understand this very well. They know empathy breeds vulnerability, and vulnerability invites control. By cloaking themselves in victimhood or distress, they lure you into a trap. Your attempts to console or excuse only deepen the cycle, solidifying their hold over you. Let's break down the mechanics of guilt tripping. It often begins with subtle insinuations or exaggerated expressions of hurt. The manipulator frames themselves as the wounded party, amplifying their suffering to make your actions or inactions seem cruel or neglectful. They might say, "After all I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" Or, "I'm just so hurt. I didn't realize you could be so heartless." These statements are carefully crafted. They contain an unspoken accusation and a demand for atonement wrapped in emotional vulnerability. The goal is to shift the focus from the manipulator's behavior to your sense of responsibility, compelling you to apologize, make excuses, or give in to their wishes. This tactic thrives on the assumption that you want to maintain harmony and appear compassionate. It preys on the universal desire to avoid alienation and guilt. But what's insidious is how guilt tripping erodes your autonomy. Over time, it conditions you to second-guess your decisions, question your worth, and prioritize the manipulator's emotional state above your own. The psychological damage goes deeper than mere annoyance or frustration. Extended exposure to guilt tripping can lead to anxiety, depression, and a diminished sense of self. You may start to internalize blame for problems that are not yours to bear, losing clarity about your boundaries. In relationships, this weaponized empathy often masks deeper patterns of emotional abuse. The manipulator may cycle between affection and guilt tripping, creating a toxic push-pull dynamic. Your empathy becomes both the bridge that connects you and the chains that bind you. Recognizing guilt tripping is the first step toward breaking free. It requires tuning into your emotional responses and identifying when guilt is being imposed rather than naturally felt. Ask yourself, are you truly responsible for the other person's feelings? Are their accusations reasonable or designed to guilt you? One common red flag is the frequent use of should statements. You should have known, you should have done this, or you should care more. These phrases place unrealistic expectations on you, deliberately triggering guilt. Another sign is when apologies or reassurances are never enough. No matter how much you concede, the guilt trip continues, suggesting that it's less about the specific issue and more about control. Understanding the manipulator's motives is crucial. Guilt tripping often stems from insecurity, a desire for power, or an attempt to avoid accountability. By making you feel guilty, they deflect attention from their own flaws or mistakes. However, empathy, even when weaponized, is a double-edged sword. Recognizing its misuse doesn't mean abandoning compassion. Instead, it means learning to protect yourself while maintaining your capacity to care genuinely. Setting healthy boundaries is essential. You can choose when to engage empathetically and when to step back. It's okay to validate someone's feelings without accepting undue blame. Saying, "I understand you're hurt, but I'm not responsible for your choices," reclaims your agency. Mindfulness practices can help you discern genuine emotional cues from manipulative tactics. Cultivating emotional intelligence equips you to respond with clarity rather than confusion or guilt. Let's not forget, guilt tripping can be subtle. even disguised as concern or care. A manipulative phrase might sound like, "I'm just worried about you," or "I'm only saying this because I love you." These masks turn empathy's protective shield inward, reflecting weaponized intent. Victims of guilt tripping often find themselves trapped in a cycle of self-doubt and self-sacrifice. Their empathy is exploited to meet the manipulator's needs, while their own emotions and desires are sidelined. Breaking this cycle demands courage, a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths and assert your own emotional rights. It means recognizing that true empathy involves respect and mutual understanding, not coercion. Consider the broader societal implications of weaponized empathy. In families, workplaces, and social circles, guilt tripping can maintain abusive power structures. Its subtlety makes it difficult to identify and address, allowing it to perpetuate silently. Awareness campaigns and psychological education can shed light on this dark manipulation. When people learn to distinguish healthy empathy from guilt tripping, they gain tools to protect themselves and support others. In conclusion, guilt tripping as weaponized empathy is a sophisticated form of psychological manipulation that preys on our innate kindness and social instincts. It blurs the line between care and control, using emotional vulnerability as a lever to gain power. Your empathy is a gift, not a weakness. Guard it wisely. Recognize when it is being twisted into a weapon. And remember, setting boundaries is an act of self-respect, not selfishness. In the end, real empathy empowers both parties. It invites connection without chains. Don't let guilt tripping steal your peace or your power. Reclaim your emotional freedom and let empathy heal rather than harm. This has been a deep dive into the dark psychology of guilt tripping, weaponized empathy's silent grip on the mind. Stay aware, stay strong, and above all, stay kind, but only to those who deserve your kindness. The silent treatment, a phrase that might seem simple, but beneath its quiet exterior lies a complex and often damaging psychological weapon. It's one of the darkest tools in the realm of human interaction. Today, we delve deep into the silent treatment, a behavior shrouded in silence but loud in its impact. Welcome to a journey through dark psychology, facts you need to understand. The silent treatment, also known as withholding communication or stonewalling, is more than just ignoring someone. It's a deliberate act of emotional manipulation. When someone uses the silent treatment, they intentionally refuse to speak or interact, creating an eerie void that feels like emotional abandonment. But why does this silence grip us with such power? The answer lies in the way humans are wired to seek social connection and approval. Humans are inherently social creatures. From infancy, we rely on communication to form bonds, feel safe, and understand our world. When communication is cut off, especially by someone important to us, it triggers primal fears. We feel isolated, rejected, and profoundly anxious. This is the power play behind the silent treatment. It exploits our deep need for connection by withholding it deliberately. In relationships, the silent treatment often surfaces as a form of punishment. Instead of addressing conflict openly, the silent party chooses to shut down. This withdrawal is not accidental. It's a calculated strategy to exert control, induce guilt, or retaliate. Dark psychology teaches us that the silent treatment is a manipulation tactic designed to unsettle the other person, leaving them desperate for reconnection on the silent partner's terms. One of the most disturbing aspects of the silent treatment is how it weaponizes vulnerability. When someone you care about suddenly stops communicating, your mind races with doubt and self-blame. Was it something I said? Did I do something wrong? This mental spiral is exactly what the silent treatment aims to provoke. It forces the victim into a state of uncertainty and emotional turmoil. Interestingly, the silent treatment is classified by psychologists as a form of emotional abuse. It may not leave visible scars, but its psychological wounds are deep and long-lasting. Emotional abuse erodes self-esteem, creates anxiety, and fosters feelings of worthlessness. The silent treatment, in particular, sends a message of rejection so powerful that victims often feel invisible, unheard, and insignificant. Many people experience the silent treatment in romantic relationships, but it also appears in families, friendships, and workplaces. In toxic family dynamics, parents may use silence as a form of control over their children, teaching them that love is conditional and can be withdrawn at any moment. Among friends, it serves as a passive-aggressive way to express anger without confrontation. In offices, silent treatment can become a tool for bullying or ostracizing colleagues. Despite its prevalence, many victims don't immediately recognize the silent treatment as abuse. The silence feels confusing rather than harmful, an unspoken mystery. This confusion deepens the impact, as victims often blame themselves or try harder to mend the silence, unknowingly stepping into a manipulative trap. Awareness is crucial to breaking free from this cycle. Dark psychology also reveals how silent treatment functions within power dynamics. The silent party holds the upper hand. Their silence controls the flow of communication, dictating when and how connection is restored. The victim becomes the supplicant, desperate to restore harmony, but often at the cost of their own emotional health. This imbalance fuels ongoing cycles of abuse and dependence. One psychological mechanism behind silent treatment is the freeze response. Unlike fight or flight, freeze involves becoming emotionally or physically immobilized when threatened. When confronted with the silent treatment, victims may feel frozen in place, unable to act or respond, overwhelmed by feelings of helplessness. This state makes it easier for the silent party to maintain control. The silent treatment also taps into cognitive dissonance. When someone you care about withholds communication without explanation, your brain struggles to reconcile the contradiction between their previous behavior and current silence. This mental discomfort drives you to seek answers or change your behavior, often aligning with the manipulator's expectations to restore peace. Research indicates that prolonged exposure to the silent treatment can lead to serious mental health consequences. Victims often develop anxiety disorders, depression, and diminished self-worth. In extreme cases, the emotional pain caused by silence can even trigger post-traumatic stress symptoms. The invisible wound inflicted by silence is real, deep, and dangerous. On the other side, why do some people resort to the silent treatment? Often it stems from learned behaviors and emotional immaturity. Those who use silence as a weapon may lack healthy communication skills or fear confrontation. However, regardless of the reasons, using silence to control or punish violates the basic principles of respectful and empathetic interaction. To break the cycle of silent treatment, awareness is the first step. Recognizing silence as a form of manipulation and emotional abuse empowers victims to set boundaries. Healthy communication means confronting conflicts openly, expressing feelings honestly, and seeking resolution rather than punishment. Silence should never be used as a weapon. It should be a choice for peace, not a tool for control. If you find yourself on the receiving end of the silent treatment, remember that silence is the abuser's weapon, not your reflection. Your feelings are valid, your voice matters, and you deserve respect. Don't internalize the silence as your fault. Seek support, whether through trusted friends, family, or professionals who understand the dynamics of emotional abuse. In relationships, setting firm boundaries against silent treatment is essential. Let your partner know that withholding communication is unacceptable. If the behavior persists, consider whether the relationship is healthy or if patterns of manipulation are too entrenched to change. Remember, love built on silence and control is not love. It's abuse disguised as indifference. Understanding the silent treatment also means exploring its cultural and social dimensions. In some cultures, silence is a form of respect or thoughtful reflection. However, when silence becomes a tool to punish or control, it crosses into toxic territory. Context matters. but the impact on emotional well-being remains significant across all boundaries. Psychologists recommend constructive ways to address silent treatment. Open, non-judgmental dialogue is key. Express your feelings without blaming or accusing. Ask the silent party to share their thoughts and reasons. If communication remains blocked, sometimes professional mediation or therapy is necessary to uncover underlying issues and promote healing. It's also important to differentiate between intentional silent treatment and genuine silence needed for processing emotions. Everyone needs space at times to reflect and regroup. The problem arises when silence is used repeatedly to ignore, punish, or manipulate. Healthy relationships honor both expression and space without using silence as a weapon. Dark psychology teaches us to be vigilant about behaviors that harm us emotionally. The silent treatment is a subtle but powerful form of manipulation. It erodes our sense of safety and belonging, playing on our deepest fears of rejection. Recognizing it is the first step to reclaiming control over our emotional lives and fostering healthier connections. In essence, the silent treatment is a dangerous game of emotional power. It preys on our natural desire for connection and uses absence to create presence, a presence of pain, confusion, and control. But silence need not be a prison. With awareness, boundaries, and courage, we can break free from the oppressive quiet and demand the open, honest communication we deserve. As you reflect on the silent treatment, consider this. Silence can be golden, but it can also be deadly. Not all silence is harmful, but when used as a weapon, it becomes a form of emotional torture. The dark psychology behind it reveals the power struggles hidden in everyday interactions, reminding us to listen closely, not just to words, but to the absence of the emotional roller coaster. Two words that perfectly capture the unpredictable, often tumultuous journey many of us endure inside our own minds and hearts. Much like an actual roller coaster, our emotions can surge upward in moments of elation, only to plummet into deep valleys of despair without warning. It's a ride that is not always thrilling or fun. Sometimes it's downright exhausting. But why does this happen? What lies beneath these intense shifts of feeling? Today, we will delve deep into the dark psychology behind the emotional roller coaster, the hidden mechanisms that drive this chaotic inner experience. At its core, the emotional roller coaster is rooted in the very fabric of our brain's survival system. Our emotions are not random. They evolved to protect us, to guide decisions, and to help us navigate the social world. Yet over time, these ancient circuits sometimes betray us, creating patterns of reaction that seem extreme, irrational, or destructive. Understanding these patterns is the first step toward gaining control. Within the realm of dark psychology, we find how manipulation, trauma, and subconscious drives feed into the whirlpool of intense emotions. One of the primary dark psychological factors behind the emotional roller coaster is emotional manipulation. This is a tactic often used in toxic or abusive relationships, but it is also present in subtle forms all around us, in workplaces, friendships, and even within our own minds. Manipulators know how to push emotional buttons to throw their targets off balance, alternating kindness with cruelty, trust with betrayal, hope with despair. These rapid shifts keep victims confused and hooked, craving the highs and fearing the lows, trapped in an endless cycle. This push and pull dynamic mimics the ups and downs of a roller coaster, forcing the victim into a state of heightened emotional reactivity and dependency. When we experience frequent emotional swings, we are often subconsciously responding to cues planted by others, designed skillfully to provoke feelings of anxiety, guilt, or validation. Over time, this dynamic rewires the brain, making emotional instability the new norm. Suddenly, feelings that once felt manageable begin to feel overwhelming and unpredictable. This is the psychological battlefield where dark forces operate, exploiting vulnerability for control. Another critical factor contributing to the emotional roller coaster is the concept of cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort experienced when one holds two or more contradictory beliefs, values, or emotions simultaneously. Imagine loving someone who continually hurts you. Your mind fights to reconcile the pain with the hope or attachment you feel. This unresolved conflict creates emotional tension that can burst forth in sudden mood swings, confusion, and self-doubt. The roller coaster effect escalates as the brain frantically tries to resolve this inner contradiction, but fails, leaving the individual feeling trapped in emotional chaos. Dark psychology teaches us that this discord can be deliberately induced. Gaslighting, for example, is a manipulative tactic where a person is made to question their reality or sanity. Over time, repeated gaslighting fractures the victim's confidence and perception, fostering profound emotional instability. Every twist and turn in their roller coaster of feelings becomes more intense. They feel lost, isolated, and manipulated, unable to trust their own mind. This mental manipulation is one of the darkest tools in the psychological playbook, designed to erode a person's sense of self and reality. Beyond manipulation by others, trauma plays a colossal role in the emotional roller coaster. Traumatic experiences, especially those occurring in early life, imprint the brain's emotional centers with heightened sensitivity. People who endure neglect, abuse, or abandonment often develop an emotional baseline that fluctuates wildly between hypervigilance and numbness, between rage and despair. The brain learns to oscillate between emotional extremes as a defense mechanism, a survival strategy gone awry. This is often seen in complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD, where the emotional regulator becomes impaired. The result is an internal storm marked by sudden outbursts, profound sadness, severe anxiety, and moments of emotional detachment. These patients often describe the experience as a relentless ride, with no clear path to calm. They are caught in a psychological loop, their minds replaying the trauma in endless cycles, each loop amplifying the emotional disturbance. The emotional roller coaster in this context becomes more than metaphorical. It is a lived reality. Dark psychology also explores the role of attachment styles in fostering emotional volatility. During childhood, the bonds formed with caregivers determine much about how safely an individual can regulate emotions later in life. Insecure attachments, whether anxious, avoidant, or disorganized, set the stage for emotional turmoil. Anxious attachment can heighten fear of abandonment, leading to frantic emotional highs and lows, depending on perceived acceptance or rejection. Avoidant attachment pushes feelings underground, only for them to erupt unexpectedly. Disorganized attachment combines these patterns with confusion and fear, resulting in especially chaotic emotional landscapes. Understanding attachment helps to demystify why some people seem particularly prone to the emotional roller coaster, while others remain calmer in turbulence. It reveals how deeply our early human experiences shape the way our brain processes relationships, safety, and emotional control. Another piece of the puzzle is the brain's chemical makeup and the influence of neurotransmitters such as serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. Imbalances in these chemicals can dramatically affect mood stability. Conditions like bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, and depression are characterized by neurochemical fluctuations that mimic an emotional roller coaster. Mood can swing from extreme euphoria to crippling depression, or from fiery rage to profound emptiness in rapid succession. Dark psychology sheds light on how these biological factors can sometimes be exploited or exacerbated by external stressors or interpersonal dynamics. For example, a person predisposed to mood instability when exposed to constant manipulation or emotional abuse may spiral further into chaos. The interplay between biology and environment becomes a vicious cycle, each feeding and intensifying the other, creating a relentless emotional storm. One subtle yet impactful factor in the emotional roller coaster experience is the phenomenon of emotional contagion. Humans are highly empathetic creatures. We pick up and mirror the emotions of those around us, often unconsciously. In toxic environments, where negativity, jealousy, or hostility prevail, this emotional infection spreads rapidly, causing mood shifts that do not originate solely from personal experience, but from external emotional climates. Dark psychology uncovers how some individuals wield this to control group dynamics or interpersonal relationships by broadcasting intense emotions, anger, sadness, or joy. They manipulate the mood of others, entrapping them in emotional cycles that reinforce the manipulator's influence. Individuals caught in this web may feel as if their feelings are unpredictable, yet the actual force comes from external manipulation through emotional contagion. Even more hidden within the emotional roller coaster is the mind's craving for stimulation. Psychologically, extremes of emotional states, whether intense happiness or deep sorrow, are powerful neurological events. The brain's reward system lights up during highs, but it may also become addicted to the cycle of fluctuation. Some people unconsciously seek out or provoke emotional upheaval because the roller coaster itself fulfills a psychological hunger for intense experience. This need can be reinforced by dark psychological conditioning or by early life experiences where calm was scarce and chaos was the only form of emotional normal. Over time, the repetitive highs and lows become a strange form of comfort, a familiar ride with familiar twists. Trying to break free from this cycle often requires confronting uncomfortable truths about oneself. A daunting task that many avoid. The path to finding peace off this roller coaster is neither quick nor simple, but it begins with awareness. Recognizing the dark psychological elements at play, from manipulation to trauma, attachment issues to neurochemical imbalances, allows for a new perspective. Emotional instability is not a personal failing or weakness. It is often a symptom of deeper underlying forces. Therapeutic approaches such as cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, and trauma-informed care offer tools to interrupt the roller coaster's momentum. These therapies work by helping individuals identify triggers, challenge distorted beliefs, regulate emotional responses, and build healthier relationships with their feelings. In many cases, healing also involves setting boundaries to protect oneself from manipulative influences and creating environments where emotional safety is possible. Ultimately, the emotional roller coaster is a journey of reconnection, reconnecting with the core self beneath layers of trauma, manipulation, fear, and chaos. It involves learning to ride the waves of feelings without being overwhelmed, to find equilibrium amid the storm. While the ride may never be perfectly smooth, gaining understanding of the dark psychology factors that fuel it empowers us to take back control. We stop being passive passengers and become active riders, steering toward calmer horizons. So the next time you find yourself spiraling up and down the emotional tracks, remember, you are not alone. And with knowledge, patience, and support, the wild ride can slow, the twists can soften, and peace can emerge from the darkness. This is the hidden truth of the emotional roller coaster, a tale of darkness and light, of struggle and survival, of chaos and healing. It is the story of the human mind and its incredible capacity to endure, adapt, and transform. Projection and blame shifting. Do dark psychological tactics so deeply embedded in human behavior that they often slip under the radar, manipulating perceptions and emotions with chilling subtlety. These mechanisms serve as psychological shields, deflecting uncomfortable truths and responsibilities onto others, preserving fragile egos and evading accountability. Today, we delve into the shadows where these patterns thrive, unraveling their origins, manifestations, and the eerie ways they erode trust and distort reality. Projection is a psychological defense mechanism first identified by Sigmund Freud. At its core, projection occurs when an individual unconsciously attributes their own undesirable thoughts, feelings, or motives to another person. Imagine feeling anger simmering beneath the surface, but unable to confront it directly. Instead, you might accuse someone else of being hostile or aggressive. This externalization allows the projector to avoid facing uncomfortable internal conflicts or aspects of themselves they'd rather deny. Blame shifting, on the other hand, is a more overt, often conscious act, where a person deliberately refuses to take responsibility for their actions or mistakes. Instead, they redirect fault onto others, crafting narratives that paint themselves as victims or innocents. While projection operates often beneath awareness, blame shifting is a strategic move, frequently employed in social, professional, or intimate relationships to maintain control or deflect criticism. Both projection and blame shifting contribute to a toxic cycle of distrust and confusion. Victims often find themselves questioning their own perceptions, trapped in a fog of doubt and denial. These tactics are hallmark traits in various personality disorders, including narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. But they are not limited to clinical diagnoses. Many people, consciously or not, use these tools as coping strategies or manipulative tactics in everyday life. Delving deeper, projection can be understood as a way to protect self-esteem. When someone holds emotions or impulses they consider unacceptable, jealousy, envy, hatred, they project them outward to lessen internal turmoil. This mechanism, while originally designed as a coping device, morphs into a tool for emotional warfare. For example, a cheating partner might accuse their significant other of infidelity, planting seeds of doubt and shifting focus away from their own betrayal. Blame shifting frequently accompanies projection, forming a compound strategy. Consider a workplace scenario. An employee misses a deadline but blames a colleague for poor communication or lack of support. Here, the blame shifter not only avoids responsibility but also damages the reputation and relationships of others. Over time, this erodes team cohesion and fosters a toxic environment. These behaviors are often subtle in their earliest stages, making them hard to identify. Projection can manifest in casual conversations or social media interactions, where people lash out at others for traits or faults that mirror their own. Blame shifting may emerge as excuses or rationalizations that deflect scrutiny. The danger lies in their snowball effect. Once established, they can spiral into chronic dysfunction. Dark psychology studies these tactics not to vilify, but to understand. Projection and blame shifting serve as lenses into human vulnerabilities and defense mechanisms. By recognizing these behaviors, individuals can better protect themselves and foster healthier relationships. Awareness is key. Understanding that when someone persistently accuses others of what they themselves embody, they may be projecting. Manipulators use projection and blame shifting as weapons. In abusive relationships, gaslighters exploit these tactics to distort their partner's reality, making them question their sanity and judgment. A gaslighter might insist, "You're the one who's paranoid," while engaging in deceptive behaviors. Gradually, the victim internalizes blame and guilt, trapped in a psychological prison built on false narratives. In the realm of social dynamics, projection and blame shifting can be wielded to influence group perceptions. Politicians, media figures, and leaders have been known to project faults onto opponents, crafting scapegoats to divert attention from their own failings or unethical actions. Understanding this allows the population to critically analyze information and resist manipulation. On an individual level, confronting projection requires emotional intelligence and self-reflection. When accused unjustly, one must discern whether the accusation reveals more about the accuser than themselves. This discernment is a shield against internalizing false blame. Developing boundaries against blame shifting involves recognizing patterns and refusing to accept responsibility for things outside one's control or truth. Projection can also be a mirror, reflecting unresolved inner conflicts. In therapy, uncovering projections helps individuals integrate denied aspects of their personality, leading to healing and personal growth. Without such insight, projection can perpetuate self-sabotage and interpersonal strife. Similarly, acknowledging one's role in mistakes instead of blaming others fosters accountability and strengthens character. In families, projection and blame shifting perpetuate cycles of dysfunction. Parents who project their insecurities onto children shape narratives that can damage self-esteem and identity. Children learn to defend themselves through similar tactics or internalize blame, leading to long-term emotional scars. Breaking these cycles requires awareness across generations. Technology and social media amplify projection and blame shifting. Online anonymity encourages people to project insecurities and blame others without immediate repercussion. Cyberbullying, cancel culture, and trolling often involve projection of personal frustrations masquerading as righteous criticism. Recognizing this pattern helps users navigate the digital landscape with more empathy and discernment. In romantic relationships, both behaviors erode intimacy. Projection can turn love into suspicion, as one partner accuses the other of feelings or actions they conceal themselves. Blame shifting undermines communication, creating standoffs where accountability is absent. Couples who become trapped in this dynamic face escalating conflicts and emotional distance. Experts suggest that cultivating self-awareness is the antidote to projection and blame shifting. Practices such as mindfulness encourage individuals to observe their thoughts and feelings non-judgmentally, reducing the compulsion to externalize blame. Emotional regulation techniques help manage discomfort without resorting to defense mechanisms. Education about these dark psychology facts equips individuals to recognize manipulative patterns in their environments. Whether in workplaces, friendships, or families, understanding projection and blame shifting fosters empathy, both for others and for oneself. With this knowledge, we can dismantle toxic cycles and create relationships built on honesty and responsibility. Ultimately, projection and blame shifting reveal a fundamental human struggle, the tension between self-image and reality. Everyone harbors flaws and vulnerabilities, but when these are hidden behind masks of accusation, the truth becomes obscured. Facing this discomfort head-on is daunting, yet essential. It is through owning our shadows that we find genuine freedom and connection. Darvo, the script flip. Imagine this. You confront someone about their harmful behavior. You expect acknowledgement, maybe even an apology, but instead the tables turn. Suddenly you are the bad guy. You're painted as the aggressor, the liar, the problem. This chilling psychological tactic is known as DARVO, an acronym that stands for Deny, Attack, and Reverse, Victim and Offender. It's a dark manipulation strategy used by some to evade responsibility, confuse their target, and escape accountability. Today, we dive deep into the shadows of DARVO, understanding its mechanics, its devastating effects, and why recognizing it is crucial to protecting your mind and soul. DARVO first entered the psychological lexicon in the late 1990s, coined by Dr. Jennifer Freyd, a psychology professor who studied victims of abuse and betrayal trauma. She observed a recurring pattern in which perpetrators of abuse not only denied their wrongdoing, but aggressively counterattacked their accusers, then claimed to be the real victims. This unsettling dynamic plays a pivotal role in many toxic relationships, whether between partners, family members, workplace dynamics, or even public figures under scrutiny. At its core, DARVO is a manipulative defense mechanism. When confronted, the offender uses 3 psychological maneuvers to disorient their target. First, deny. The accused refuses the allegations, often vehemently. The denial might be blatant or nuanced, but its purpose remains consistent: to invalidate the accuser's experience and undermine the truth. Denial alone is common in many disputes, but DARVO intensifies this by adding 2 more devastating layers. Second comes attack. The offender shifts swiftly from denial to aggressive counterattack. They may lash out verbally, blame their accuser for fabricating lies, or question their motives. This attack isn't random. It's calculated to intimidate, confuse, and silence the accuser. It destabilizes the victim's confidence and often deters others from stepping in or believing the accuser's story. The final and perhaps most insidious part of DARVO is reverse victim and offender. Here, the perpetrator claims that they themselves are the real victims and that the actual victim is the offender. This twist turns the narrative upside down, forcing doubt, rewriting history, and redirecting sympathy away from the true harmed party. It's a profound violation of trust, twisting reality itself. This script flip is not just about denial, it's about gaslighting on steroids. Darvo can make victims question their memories, their sanity, and their right to speak out. It weaponizes societal biases that too often side with the accused or dismiss claims of abuse and misconduct. The manipulator exploits these biases to gain the upper hand. Once Darvo begins, victims often find themselves trapped in a confusing emotional storm. They may feel guilt, shame, anxiety, and isolation. Attempts to tell their story are met with hostility or disbelief. Friends and family might hesitate to intervene, uncertain whom to believe. This isolates the victim even further, deepening their trauma. One common arena where Darvo plays out is in cases of interpersonal abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault, and emotional abuse. Perpetrators use this tactic to maintain power and control. By flipping the script, they evade consequences and continue to manipulate not only their victims, but the surrounding social world. Darvo also appears in the workplace. When whistleblowers expose unethical or harmful behavior, the accused may use this tactic to undermine their credibility. Suddenly, the whistleblower is labeled as disruptive or malicious, while the accused portrays themselves as wrongly attacked. This not only protects offenders, but discourages others from speaking up, perpetuating toxic environments. In political and public spheres, Darvo can be a powerful tool for deflecting scandals and criticism. Figures accused of wrongdoing deny allegations, attack their critics furiously, and portray themselves as victims of political witch hunts or media conspiracies. This strategy can polarize audiences and muddy public discourse, diluting accountability. Understanding Darvo arms us against its toxic effects. Awareness helps victims and witnesses recognize when this script flip is being performed, which is the first step toward breaking its grip. When confronted with denial, aggression, and victim reversal, pause to analyze the dynamics carefully. Question the apparent narrative and seek unbiased evidence. It's also important to support victims when they come forward, especially in the face of Darvo tactics. Validation, empathy, and listening are crucial. Perpetrators thrive on doubt and silence. Creating environments where victims feel safe and believed hampers the effectiveness of Darvo. Mental health professionals caution that Darvo not only harms victims but also distorts justice systems. Because it manipulates perception so effectively, it can lead to wrongful doubt, guilty parties avoiding accountability, and innocent victims suffering prolonged trauma. This makes training for law enforcement, therapists, and counselors essential in spotting and countering Darvo. Darvo is a dark facet of human psychology, revealing how some exploit empathy and societal norms to escape responsibility. It exposes a ruthless side of manipulation where truth itself becomes a battlefield. But knowledge is power. By uncovering the patterns of deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender, we grow stronger individually and collectively. If you ever find yourself in a situation where your reality is questioned and you feel attacked for seeking justice or truth, consider the possibility of Darvo at play. Trust your experience, seek support, and don't allow the script flip to redefine your story. In the end, Darvo teaches us about the depths of manipulation, but also about the resilience of the human spirit. Truth defeats deception when we refuse to be silenced or led astray. Awareness shines a light into the darkness, revealing the true roles behind the masks. Isolation as control. Isolation is more than just a physical state, it is a powerful psychological tool used to manipulate, dominate, and control. In the realm of dark psychology, isolation is a sinister strategy employed by abusers, cult leaders, and manipulators to sever an individual's connections to the outside world, thereby increasing their vulnerability. This tactic is subtle, insidious, and often overlooked, yet its effects can be devastating and long-lasting. At its core, isolation functions to limit an individual's access to alternative perspectives, emotional support, and resources. When a person is cut off from friends, family, or any form of external communication, they become increasingly dependent on the controlling figure. This dependency creates a fertile ground for influence, where the isolated individual's reality becomes tightly regulated by their captor. The absence of competing voices erodes critical thinking and enhances compliance. Users understand the potency of isolation. By gradually removing social interactions, they establish dominance and diminish the victim's self-esteem. This process rarely happens overnight. It is a slow, calculated progression. At first, the manipulator may encourage distance by sowing seeds of doubt about loved ones, or by creating conflict that forces emotional withdrawal. Over time, the victim finds themselves with fewer and fewer allies, trapped in a vortex of loneliness and self-doubt. In cult environments, isolation is a core tactic for indoctrination and control. Cult leaders systematically strip members of outside relationships, sometimes relocating their followers to remote locations or enforcing strict communication limits. This physical and psychological isolation weakens resistance, making members more susceptible to the group's ideology. In this controlled bubble, the leader's narrative becomes absolute truth, and any dissent is silenced harshly or called out as betrayal. Isolation also distorts perception of reality. Human connection is fundamental to mental health and maintaining a balanced worldview. When isolated individuals become susceptible to suggestion and manipulation, their fears and anxieties intensify without reassurance from others. The manipulator exploits these vulnerabilities, imposing their worldview as the only valid one. The victim loses their sense of self, replaced by an identity shaped entirely by their oppressor. Domestic abuse scenarios reveal chilling examples of isolation as control. Abusers often restrict victims' movements, monitor communication, or discourage contact with friends and family. In extreme cases, they may move the victim to unfamiliar locations, erasing their sense of familiarity and safety. This confiscates the victim's autonomy, making escape seem impossible. The constant monitoring and control instill a deep sense of helplessness and fear. Isolation can be emotional as well as physical. Emotional isolation occurs when a person feels misunderstood, unloved, or invisible even in the presence of others. Manipulators create an emotional divide, making victims feel alienated or different, convincing them they have no one who truly cares. This internal alienation intensifies the sense of loneliness and increases reliance on the abuser, paradoxically the source of their suffering. Technology offers new avenues for control through isolation. Digital manipulation can sever connections subtly. Abusers might control online access, monitor messages, or use social media to spread misinformation. Cyber isolation can be devastating because it invades even virtual spaces, places where isolated victims might otherwise find solace. The sense of being watched or controlled online compounds the experience of isolation, making it feel unavoidable and total. Isolation's long-term psychological effects are profound. Extended separation from supportive networks can lead to depression, anxiety, and feelings of worthlessness. Victims may experience cognitive dissonance, holding conflicting beliefs about themselves and their situation, because the manipulator has poisoned their self-view while cutting off alternatives. This internal conflict keeps victims trapped in cycles of abuse, undermining their ability to make decisions or seek help. Breaking isolation is often the first crucial step toward recovery. Re-establishing contact with friends, family, or support groups restores alternative perspectives, emotional safety, and hope. However, breaking free requires immense courage and external support. Manipulators anticipate attempts to escape and often escalate controlling behaviors when threatened. Understanding the mechanics of isolation as a control tactic helps allies and professionals better support victims and develop effective interventions. Isolation is not always obvious. It can masquerade as concern, protectiveness, or love. For example, a partner might insist they are just keeping you safe by limiting social interactions or checking up constantly. Recognizing these behaviors as forms of control requires awareness and education about dark psychological tactics. Awareness empowers potential victims to identify harmful patterns and resist manipulation before total isolation takes hold. One chilling aspect of isolation is its ability to erode an individual's boundaries and willpower quietly. As control tightens, victims often begin to doubt their own judgments and experiences. The manipulator's narrative replaces their memories and feelings, a technique sometimes called gaslighting. Without others to corroborate their reality, victims can lose track of truth, accepting the abuser's version of events as reality. This distortion deepens the isolation, encasing the victim in a psychological prison. Children are especially vulnerable to isolation as control. Abusive caregivers might isolate a child from peers or restrict social exposure under the guise of protection. This denies children vital social learning experiences and fosters dependence on the abuser for validation and trust. The long-term effects include attachment issues, low self-esteem, and difficulties forming healthy relationships later in life. In institutional settings like prisons or psychiatric hospitals, isolation takes the form of solitary confinement or social deprivation. These methods are sometimes justified as discipline or safety measures, but can have devastating psychological consequences. Prolonged social isolation can induce hallucinations, severe anxiety, and a breakdown of mental functions. The use of isolation in these contexts reveals how fundamental human connection is to sanity and control. Isolation as a weapon of control taps deeply into human nature. Social creatures by instinct, humans require connection to thrive. Cutting off these ties triggers primal fears of abandonment and rejection. Manipulators exploit this, leveraging the pain of isolation as leverage to bend victims' wills. The cruelty of this tactic lies in its invisibility. Often, by the time isolation is recognized, its damage has already taken root deeply. Understanding the role of isolation in control scenarios is vital in recognizing and combating abuse. Whether through physical seclusion, emotional withdrawal, or digital manipulation, isolation dismantles resistance and creates obedience. Victims become easier to exploit because their world shrinks to the manipulator's domain. Education, vigilance, and compassion are essential tools in breaking isolation's chains and restoring freedom. When addressing isolation, it is important to recognize the subtle warnings. Excessive jealousy, controlling behavior disguised as care, discouragement of outside relationships, and enforced secrecy are red flags. Recognizing these signs early can prevent the spiral into complete isolation. Support networks must be aware that intervention can save lives by restoring connections and providing pathways out of control. Isolation also plays a critical role in psychological warfare and intimidation tactics. In hostage or kidnapping situations, isolators keep victims cut off from the outside world to disorient and weaken them. The absence of news, interaction, and emotional support fractures their resilience and enhances compliance. In such contexts, isolation is a calculated method to break the human spirit. Survivors of isolation-based control often describe the experience as a gradual fading of self. They recall feeling lost, unsure who they were or what they believed. Recovery involves rebuilding identity through reconnecting with others, rediscovering passions, and relearning trust. While the scars of isolation run deep, healing is possible with support and time. Isolation can also intersect with other dark psychology tactics like intimidation, threats, and manipulation to create complex control systems. For example, a manipulator may isolate a victim physically, then use fear to keep them compliant and gaslight to distort perceptions. This multifaceted approach makes intervention difficult because the victim's reality is so thoroughly reshaped. In some cases, isolation is enforced by societal or systemic structures. Marginalized groups may experience social isolation through discrimination, exclusion, or neglect. This form of isolation limits access to resources, information, and supportive relationships, increasing vulnerability to exploitation and abuse. Recognizing isolation's role beyond individual relationships broadens our understanding of control dynamics. Triangulation, love, triangle of doom. In the intricate dance of human relationships, few dynamics are as complex and psychologically charged as triangulation. This phenomenon, often described as the love triangle of doom, weaves a dark thread through the fabric of our emotional lives. To understand triangulation is to delve deeply into the shadowy corners of human interaction, where manipulation, insecurity, and psychological power plays quietly dictate the course of our connections. Today, we're going to explore the chilling realities behind triangulation, uncover its roots in dark psychology, and reveal why this pattern can leave lasting scars on those caught within its grip. Triangulation, at its core, is a psychological manipulation tactic designed to create emotional tension and control by involving a third party in a conflict or relationship. It thrives on the human tendency to seek validation and safety in numbers, but it uses this instinct against us. Picture a triangle, where instead of balance and stability, each angle represents a person caught in a web of manipulation, jealousy, and deceit. The person at the apex uses the other two as pawns, controlling the narrative and sowing discord between them. The result? A toxic cycle that feeds on fear, insecurity, and emotional pain. The origins of triangulation can be traced back to family systems theory, developed by psychiatrist Murray Bowen. He observed that in dysfunctional families, one member would often create an alliance with a third party to avoid direct confrontation or anxiety in relationships. While this initially might seem like a coping mechanism, it quickly evolves into a destructive pattern. In romantic relationships, the love triangle emerges as one partner manipulates the other by drawing a third into the emotional equation, be it a lover, a friend, or even an imaginary rival. This is no ordinary triangle. It's a dark geometry of love and power where control replaces genuine connection. One of the most sinister aspects of triangulation is how it undermines trust. When someone uses triangulation, they intentionally pit two people against one another, often by sharing selective truths or outright lies. This creates confusion and paranoia. The targeted individuals start to question their perceptions and their memories. Am I being paranoid? Is this person truly against me? The manipulator fuels these doubts, all the while positioning themselves as the unifying force or the only trustworthy party. This is psychological warfare, cloaked in the guise of concern or love. Dark psychology sheds light on why triangulation is such an effective yet devastating form of manipulation. It taps into core human vulnerabilities: fear of abandonment, desire for approval, and need for belonging. The manipulator often exhibits traits seen in narcissistic personalities: the craving for control, lack of empathy, and a propensity for exploitation. By creating a love triangle, they play one person's affection or loyalty against another's, ensuring they remain emotionally indispensable and at the center of attention. This creates a dependency that's hard to break, trapping victims in a cycle of emotional turmoil. In many ways, triangulation mimics classic mind games. The manipulator crafts scenarios that make the victims compete, not just for love, but for validation and truth. This emotional gambling chips away at an individual's self-esteem and mental well-being. It's no coincidence that those caught in such triangles often experience anxiety, depression, and feelings of powerlessness. The emotional exhaustion is real and profound. Sleep becomes restless, thoughts spiral into dark places, and the heart aches with the weight of betrayal and confusion. But how does one recognize triangulation before it spirals out of control? The signs are subtle but telling. If you find yourself constantly hearing about another person through someone else instead of directly, that's a red flag. If a partner frequently brings up a rival in conversations or seems to pit you and another individual against each other, suspicion should arise. Another indicator is when communication feels deliberately fragmented. One person shares information selectively, while the other's attempts at clarity are thwarted or ridiculed. Fundamentally, triangulation thrives on secrecy and division, So transparency, or the lack thereof, is a critical clue. The emotional fallout from triangulation can be devastating. Victims often report a deep sense of betrayal, not just because of the manipulation, but due to the erosion of their ability to trust their own feelings. In the context of romantic relationships, the damage is particularly profound. Love, which should be a source of safety and solace, becomes a battlefield. The constant comparison to a third party diminishes self-worth, breeding jealousy and resentment. Over time, this emotional fracture can lead to the collapse of the relationship itself, or worse, lasting psychological scars that affect future connections. It is essential to understand that triangulation doesn't always occur with conscious malice. Sometimes, it's an unconscious pattern, reinforced through past trauma or learned behavior. For instance, individuals who grew up in families where triangulation was the norm might repeat these dynamics unknowingly in their adult relationships. This doesn't excuse the harm caused, but highlights how deeply embedded this pattern can be. Awareness becomes the first step toward healing and breaking the cycle. Escaping the grip of triangulation demands clarity and boundaries. Victims must strive to reestablish direct communication and resist being drawn into the manipulator's game. This often means refusing to engage in conversations that revolve around the third party or demanding honesty and openness. It can be painful. Cutting through layers of deceit requires courage and sometimes the support of trusted friends, therapists, or counselors. But with perseverance, individuals can reclaim their emotional autonomy and restore healthier relationship dynamics. One of the darkest but most fascinating aspects of triangulation is how it exposes the interplay of control and vulnerability. The manipulator's power lies in exploiting emotional needs while masking their own insecurities. Behind the scenes, they fear abandonment and rejection just as deeply as their victims do. The triangle becomes a twisted safety net, a way to hold on, even if it means hurting others. This paradox of human psychology reveals that at the heart of manipulation often lies deep pain, making understanding not just an intellectual pursuit, but a compassionate one. In the realm of dark psychology, triangulation serves as a stark reminder of how love and power can become dangerously entangled. It warns us of the shadow side of human connection, where the desire to dominate can corrupt even the most intimate bonds. Yet, it also offers hope, a call to recognize these patterns early, protect our emotional well-being, and seek genuine, honest relationships built on trust rather than control. In conclusion, the love triangle of doom is more than just a dramatic trope from soap operas or novels. It is a real psychological phenomenon with tangible consequences. Triangulation undermines trust, chips away at self-esteem, and traps individuals in cycles of manipulation and pain. Understanding its mechanisms helps us see through the fog of emotional confusion and avoid falling prey to its dark influence. Ultimately, by shining a light on triangulation, we reclaim the power to choose connection over control, empathy over exploitation, and love that heals rather than destroys. Peace. If you are currently tangled in the web of triangulation, remember that you are not alone. Awareness is your first step toward freedom. Seek support, set boundaries, and prioritize your mental health. The triangle may seem unbreakable, but with knowledge and resolve, you can dismantle it piece by piece, paving the way for healthier, more authentic relationships. Mirroring your soul. Mirroring your soul is a concept that goes beyond surface-level reflections. It delves deep into the unseen, the intangible, and the often darker aspects of human psychology. In this script, we will explore how mirroring your soul can reveal profound truths about identity, empathy, manipulation, and hidden desires. Stay with me as we journey into the shadows of the mind, uncovering dark psychological facts that resonate with the mysterious art of mirroring. At its core, mirroring is the act of reflecting another person's behaviors, emotions, or attitudes. Psychologists often talk about mirroring as a natural social tool helping humans build rapport and foster connection. Yet, beneath this benign explanation lies a more complex mechanism. Mirroring can serve as a mask, a weapon, and even a trap that reveals the darkest corners of the psyche. When you mirror someone, you are essentially becoming an echo of their soul. But what happens when the soul you echo is fractured, tormented, or malevolent? What happens when mirroring reaches beyond mimicry and crosses into manipulation? These questions lead us to explore dark psychology, the shadowy side of human behavior where control, deceit, and primal instincts intersect. One fundamental fact about mirroring is its power to create intimacy. When someone mirrors your gestures, tone of voice, or posture, your brain subconsciously feels a sense of safety. This is because mirroring signals similarity and mutual understanding. From an evolutionary standpoint, it is easier to trust those who resemble us in subtle ways. However, this trust can be exploited. Dark psychology exploits mirroring's power to lure victims into false comfort, making it an essential tool in the arsenal of manipulators. Consider the manipulative narcissist who masterfully mirrors the hopes, dreams, and fears of their target. By reflecting back exactly what you want to see, they create an illusion of deep connection. You believe that this person truly understands your soul. In reality, they are using mirroring to weave a web of dependency and control. The danger here lies in losing oneself in their reflection, forgetting where your soul ends and theirs begins. Mirroring also taps into the concept of shadow selves. In psychology, the shadow represents parts of the self we deny or hide because they are uncomfortable or socially unacceptable. When we mirror others, especially those who express traits we suppress, we briefly confront our shadow. This can be unsettling, but also enlightening. It is as if the mirrored soul holds a lantern that reveals the darkness lurking within us. Dark psychological facts tell us that the process of mirroring can awaken latent impulses. When you see someone acting with confidence, aggression, or detachment, and you mirror these traits, you might find these qualities surfacing within yourself. This is not merely mimicry, it is a psychological contagion. Emotions and behaviors are contagious through mirroring, sometimes pulling you into states you would otherwise avoid. But mirroring your soul goes even deeper. Imagine that the soul is a mirror itself, not just reflecting others, but accumulating fragments of every person you touch. Each interaction leaves a shard, a hidden imprint on your consciousness. Over time, these shards build a mosaic, a composite self shaped by reflections. In a dark sense, this means identity is fluid and vulnerable, constantly reshaped by the mirrored energies of others. This vulnerability is a breeding ground for psychological warfare. In toxic relationships, mirroring can become a battleground. Gaslighting, for example, is a twisted form of mirroring where the manipulator distorts reality to confuse and dominate their victim. They mirror what the victim believes, but twist it just enough to create doubt. As a result, the victim loses trust in their own perceptions, helplessly looking into a fractured soul mirror that shows nothing but distortion. On the other hand, mirroring can be a path to profound healing and self-discovery. By consciously observing what you mirror in others, you can uncover hidden fears, desires, and motivations. This reflective process allows you to reclaim control over your own soul. You learn to distinguish which reflections serve your growth and which do not. In this light, mirroring becomes a tool of empowerment rather than entrapment. Consider the art of psychotherapy, where the therapist often mirrors the client's feelings and thoughts to foster understanding and healing. Unlike manipulative mirroring, this practice is transparent and ethical. It provides a safe space for the client to explore their soul's reflections without fear of exploitation. This highlights a crucial point. The intent behind mirroring defines its moral dimension. Dark psychology teaches us that not all mirrors are equal. Some are shards of pain and manipulation, while others are windows to growth and empathy. recognizing the difference requires heightened self-awareness and emotional intelligence. It means learning to walk the fine line between vulnerability and protection, openness and caution. Another dark psychological fact about mirroring is its role in emotional vampirism. Emotional vampires are individuals who draw energy from others to sustain their own fragile egos. They use mirroring not to connect, but to drain vitality. By reflecting your emotions, they create a feedback loop that traps you in their emotional vortex. Escaping this loop demands recognizing when the mirror is a tool of depletion rather than reflection. Mirroring also relates to the phenomenon of codependency. In codependent relationships, boundaries dissolve and individuals become obsessed with reflecting each other's emotions. This creates an unhealthy symbiosis where personal identity is sacrificed for the mirrored image. The soul, in this context, becomes a hostage to the reflected needs and insecurities of another. Yet, even in the darkest dynamics, there is a glimmer of hope. Recognizing the patterns of mirroring enables you to break free from toxic cycles. Mindful detachment from harmful reflections allows you to restore your authentic self. It requires courage to look into the mirror and face not only your own shadows, but also the distorted reflections cast by others. Our journey into mirroring your soul would be incomplete without discussing the neurological underpinnings. Mirror neurons in the brain play a significant role in this process. These neurons activate both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing the same action. They form the biological basis for empathy and social learning. However, they also make us susceptible to unconscious mirroring and emotional contagion. This biological wiring makes mirroring an automatic process, often outside conscious control. The dark side here is that manipulative individuals can exploit these natural mechanisms without your awareness. They prime your mirror neurons to align with their intentions, subtly bending your emotional and psychological state. Awareness of this fact is your first defense against unwanted influence. Mirroring also intersects with the concept of projection. Projection occurs when we attribute our own undesirable traits to others. When mirroring your soul, it can be challenging to discern whether the reflection you see is truly the other person or a projection of your own inner world. This blurring complicates our understanding of identity and reality, creating a psychological maze where mirrors and shadows intertwine. The interplay between mirroring and identity creates a paradox. We depend on mirrors, both literal and metaphorical, to understand ourselves, yet reliance on external reflections risks losing touch with our core self. The soul craves authenticity, yet it is malleable and influenced by the countless mirrors it encounters. Finding balance between external reflection and internal truth is a lifelong challenge. In the context of dark psychology, mirroring reveals the fragile boundaries of the soul. It exposes how easily trust can be manipulated, how identity can be distorted, and how emotions can be weaponized. But it also illuminates the potential for empathy, healing, and transcendence. Mirroring your soul is a shadow walk between light and darkness, a journey that demands courage, insight, and self-awareness. As you consider these ideas, think about your own experiences with mirroring. When have you recognized yourself in another's eyes? When have you felt lost in a reflection that was not truly yours? How do you protect your soul from harmful mirrors? And how do you embrace the ones that reveal your deepest truths? Remember, the soul's mirror is not just a tool to see others, but a doorway to understanding yourself. Whether in the light or the dark, mirroring is an intimate dance of perception, identity, and power. It invites you to look deeply, beyond appearances, beyond masks, beyond illusion, into the very essence of what it means to be human. Foot in the door trick. Welcome to this deep dive into one of the most subtle yet powerful techniques used in influence and persuasion, known as the foot in the door trick. Dark psychology, the study of manipulation and influence tactics that exploit human behavior, reveals many such strategies designed to sway people without their conscious awareness. The foot in the door technique is among the oldest and most effective. Today, we'll explore how it works, why it's so effective, and the psychological mechanisms behind it. This is a journey into the shadowy corners of human interaction. So settle in as we uncover the truth behind this fascinating psychological phenomenon. The term foot in the door originates from the literal image of placing your foot to keep a door open, allowing you to push further inside. Psychologically, it refers to the tactic of making a small initial request to gain compliance and subsequently making a larger request that is more likely to be accepted because of the initial agreement. This approach uses gradual escalation to manipulate the mind into increasing commitments over time. Now, why would someone say yes to a bigger request just because they said yes to a smaller one? The answer lies in our need for consistency and social conformity. Humans have an inherent desire to appear consistent to themselves and others. When someone agrees to a small favor or request, they often see themselves as cooperative or helpful people. This self-perception then creates a pressure to act in ways that align with this identity. So, when a larger request follows, agreeing maintains that consistency. Saying no to the bigger request would create discomfort or cognitive dissonance, holding two conflicting beliefs at once, being helpful yet refusing a reasonable favor. To avoid this discomfort, most people comply. This is the psychological engine that drives the foot in the door effect. Imagine a stranger at your door asking first if you can just answer a few survey questions about your daily habits. You agree, being polite and seeing no harm. After answering, they come back weeks later and ask if you'll sign a petition supporting a local cause. Because you already agreed to the survey, you're more likely to say yes to the petition. That small initial yes paved the way for a bigger yes. This is the foot in the door technique in action. What's fascinating is how this psychological tool doesn't rely on coercion or threats. Instead, it works on internal motivations, our desire for consistency, social approval, and sometimes even our ego. It exploits the way we mentally tag our actions to build a narrative of who we are. That narrative compels us to stay on course once we've started. It's subtle but remarkably effective. Now, you might wonder how lasting this effect is. Research in social psychology suggests the influence can be surprisingly enduring. Even after the initial request is long forgotten, the internalized commitment can linger, making people more receptive to future requests down the line. This persistence is what makes the foot in the door technique a favorite among marketers, salespeople, political campaigners, and even cult recruiters. In the realm of dark psychology, manipulation through the foot in the door trick is often disguised beneath layers of kindness, friendliness, and innocuous requests. A shady salesperson might start by asking you to look at a product, just holding it for a moment, before asking you to try it on. Then they upsell you gradually, banking on that small chain of agreements built step by step. This tactic isn't limited to human interaction between strangers. It infiltrates relationships as well, friendships, romantic partnerships, even family dynamics. Consider emotional manipulation scenarios, where someone first asks for minor favors or permissions and then progressively escalates demands, all while making the other person feel like they are simply being helpful or supportive. The victim's sense of self slowly adjusts until the manipulator's larger demands seem reasonable, even inevitable. It's important to understand that the foot in the door technique in itself isn't evil. It's a tool, a method of persuasion that can be used ethically or unethically depending on intent. Charities, for instance, use it responsibly by first asking for a small donation or a signature, then later seeking more substantial help. However, in the hands of those who understand dark psychology, it becomes a weapon of subtle control. The origins of this technique trace back to the 9960s, when psychologists Jonathan Friedman and Scott Fraser conducted the first experiments confirming its effectiveness. In one seminal study, they asked homeowners to place small signs in their windows supporting safe driving. Most agreed. Later, when these same homeowners were asked to place large, brightly colored signs in their front yards, compliance was dramatically higher compared to households that hadn't received the initial small request. This was powerful proof of the foot in the door effect's influence. The science behind this phenomenon connects deeply with the theory of cognitive dissonance, introduced by psychologist Leon Festinger. Cognitive dissonance occurs when we hold two conflicting thoughts or beliefs, creating psychological discomfort. Agreeing to small requests nudges us toward a self-image as cooperative and helpful people. Declining larger requests later would contradict this image, creating dissonance. To reduce the discomfort, people adjust their attitudes to match their behaviors, making it easier to say yes again. There's also an underlying social norm at work, often called the norm of consistency. Society values reliability and consistency in behavior. People who display inconsistency are often viewed with suspicion or distrust. So, compliance isn't just about avoiding internal conflict, it's about maintaining our social standing and relationships. The foot in the door tactic leverages this need to appear socially acceptable and trustworthy. Now consider the dark psychological implications of this technique in manipulation and control. Someone skilled in psychological influence can sequence their requests carefully. For example, a manipulative partner might start by asking for small emotional favors, checking in frequently, sharing personal secrets, to build trust and compliance. Gradually, the demands increase to include deeper emotional sacrifices or control over personal choices. Each step is small enough not to raise alarms, but significant enough to chip away at autonomy. In the corporate world, sales strategies often deploy the foot in the door method. A salesperson might offer a free sample or a trial version of a product to get the customer invested. Once the customer experiences a small commitment, signing up for newsletters or sharing feedback, they are more amenable to purchasing higher-priced items later. The initial free or low-commitment action lowers resistance and sets the stage for bigger commitments. So, what else could the sales commitment action be? It may well be a super or a super trainer or garrison trained in helping people. Social media and digital advertising today have become new playgrounds for the foot in the door technique. Asking users to like a page, share a post, or join a free webinar serves as small requests that build initial engagement. Once engaged, users are often targeted with premium offers, subscriptions, or products. The initial small action builds a psychological stepping stone to more significant commitment. But how can you protect yourself from this subtle manipulation? Awareness is your first line of defense. Recognizing when someone is using a series of increasing requests is crucial. Pause before agreeing to the first small favor if you feel unsure. It might be setting you up for more significant demands. Reflect on whether your agreement aligns with your true desires or if you're driven by a desire to be consistent or polite. Building a habit of questioning why you're saying yes can help. Ask yourself, am I agreeing because I genuinely want to, or because I feel obligated to maintain a self-image or social role? Being mindful of this dynamic strengthens your autonomy and makes it harder for manipulators to exploit your need for consistency. Another defense is setting clear personal boundaries. When you recognize a pattern of escalating requests, don't hesitate to say no. Establish what you're comfortable with and communicate that firmly. Manipulators depend on you bending those boundaries. Gradually but decisively asserting limits can halt the process. Education about dark psychological tactics like the foot in the door trick empowers you to see beneath the surface of everyday interactions. Many situations we encounter daily, from sales calls to social favors, can carry this subtle form of manipulation. Understanding the technique allows you to respond consciously instead of falling prey to unconscious compliance. It's also important to cultivate self-compassion. Sometimes people comply out of kindness or social pressure. These are natural human tendencies, not signs of weakness. Recognizing that you are learning and growing makes you stronger and less vulnerable to repeated manipulation. In conclusion, the foot in the door trick is a simple yet profound psychological strategy. It capitalizes on our need for consistency, social approval, and self-concept to gently guide us from small agreements toward larger commitments. While it can be used ethically for positive outcomes, in the hands of those practicing dark psychology, it becomes a powerful tool for manipulation and control. Being aware of this tactic, understanding the psychological forces behind it, and learning how to assert your agency protects you from unknowingly being influenced. The next time someone makes a small request, pause and consider the possibility that it might be an opening step for much more. Your mind, your choices, your power, that's what truly matters. The illusory truth effect. The illusory truth effect is a psychological phenomenon that reveals just how easily our brains can be fooled by repetition. It's a subtle yet powerful cognitive bias that makes repeated information more believable, regardless of its truthfulness. This effect plays a significant role in shaping our beliefs, decisions, and even our perception of reality. Today, we'll explore the depths of this fascinating mental quirk, uncovering dark psychology facts and how this effect influences our everyday lives. Imagine hearing the same statement over and over again. At first, you might be skeptical, questioning its validity. But as the repetition continues, something changes. The statement begins to feel more familiar, more credible. Even if you initially doubted it, the repeated exposure makes you more likely to accept it as true. This is the essence of the illusory truth effect. It's not about the logic or evidence supporting a claim, rather, it's about familiarity breeding belief. Psychologists have known about this effect for decades, but it was formally named and studied extensively starting in the late 20th century. One of the landmark studies in 1977 by Hasher, Goldstein, and Topino demonstrated this phenomenon clearly. Participants were shown a series of statements, some true and some false. Later, when asked to judge the truthfulness of these statements, those that had been repeated multiple times were rated as more truthful than those presented only once, regardless of their actual accuracy. This finding has profound implications. It means that the mere act of repetition can override our critical thinking, turning misinformation into accepted facts. In a world flooded with news, social media posts, and advertising, the illusory truth effect becomes a powerful tool for influencers, marketers, and manipulators. Dark psychology, the study of how people use psychological tactics to influence, manipulate, and control others, often exploits the illusory truth effect. Manipulators understand that truth doesn't always matter. What matters is what people believe to be true. By repeating lies or misleading narratives, they can shape public opinion, reinforce stereotypes, or create false memories. Consider propaganda as a real-world example. Governments and organizations have long employed repetitive messaging to indoctrinate populations. By consistently exposing people to specific slogans, ideas, or narratives, they embed certain beliefs deep into the collective consciousness. Over time, these beliefs become so ingrained that they feel unquestionably true, even when confronted with contrary evidence. Social media has amplified the illusory truth effect to unprecedented levels. Algorithms prioritize content that gets high engagement, often leading to the repeated exposure of the same headlines, memes, or rumors across different platforms. When a false story is shared numerous times, users begin to accept it as fact simply because they've seen it so often. The emotional pull of the content, combined with repetition, makes debunking misinformation an uphill battle. But why does repetition increase perceived truth? The answer lies in our brain's preference for cognitive ease. Processing new information requires effort. When we encounter something familiar, our brains recognize it more quickly and with less mental energy. This feeling of ease or fluency registers as a positive signal, which we subconsciously interpret as a sign of truth. Interestingly, this effect occurs even with statements that are clearly nonsensical or absurd. Repeating the phrase, "the sky is green and full of cheese," over and over can eventually lead some individuals to rate it as more truthful than unfamiliar statements. This isn't just about gullibility, it highlights how our minds rely heavily on heuristics, mental shortcuts that simplify complex judgments. The illusory truth effect also influences memory. Repeated exposure doesn't just make misinformation seem true, it can actually alter the way we remember events. False information that is heard multiple times can become intertwined with genuine memories, creating what psychologists call false memories. People may confidently recall details that never happened simply because they've been told them repeatedly. This has dangerous consequences in legal contexts. Eyewitness testimonies can be tainted by repeated suggestions from interrogators or media coverage. Jurors might be swayed by repetitive claims rather than concrete evidence, leading to miscarriages of justice. Understanding the illusory truth effect is crucial for legal professionals, psychologists, and anyone invested in truth and fairness. In advertising, repetition is a cornerstone strategy. Brands use it to build recognition and trust. The more often you see a product name, logo, or slogan, the more likely you are to consider it reliable or superior. This isn't always deceptive, but when combined with exaggerated claims or hidden truths, it can manipulate consumers' perceptions and decisions. Political campaigns are notorious for leveraging this effect. Repeating simple, memorable phrases or slogans implants ideas in the public psyche. When these messages resonate emotionally, repetition cements them further. Voters may adopt stances based on repeated talking points rather than in-depth analysis of policies or facts. Interestingly, experts have found that effortful thinking can reduce the illusory truth effect. When people critically evaluate information, fact-check, or consider alternative perspectives, they're less susceptible to believing repeated falsehoods. However, in everyday situations, most individuals operate on cognitive autopilot, relying on mental shortcuts to navigate the overload of information. This interplay between mental ease and susceptibility has ethical implications. Advertisers, political strategists, and media outlets wield enormous power by controlling the flow and frequency of information. This raises questions about responsibility and the need for media literacy education to help people spot manipulation. Moreover, the illusory truth effect isn't limited to words or sentences. Visual repetition also plays a role. Logos, images, and symbols repeated in a context can gain an aura of credibility. Fake news websites mimicking the design of reputable sources use this principle to fool readers. The more familiar the presentation, the more believable the content appears. On a personal level, the illusory truth effect influences daily interactions and belief systems. Cultural myths, urban legends, and even superstitions often depend on repetition across generations to persist. It's why some false ideas become societal truths, difficult to challenge because of their embedded familiarity. Yet, awareness is a powerful antidote. When you recognize how repetition affects your judgment, you can consciously pause before accepting information as true. Fact-checking, seeking multiple sources, and maintaining healthy skepticism shield the mind from manipulation. In a world rife with misinformation, these habits are vital. To further illustrate, consider the impact of fake reviews online. A product may have dozens of glowing reviews that repeat the same phrases. This repetition gives the impression of authenticity and satisfaction, persuading shoppers. Even if these reviews are fabricated, the illusory truth effect magnifies their influence on buying decisions. Similarly, conspiracy theories thrive on repetition within tight-knit communities. Constant exposure to the same ideas, supported by reinforcing anecdotes and selective evidence, hardens belief. Individuals become more resistant to contradictory facts because the repeated narrative feels unquestionably true. Scientists continue to study the illusory truth effect to uncover its nuances. Factors such as age, cognitive ability, and emotional state influence susceptibility. For example, older adults may be more prone due to declining memory and increased reliance on familiarity when processing information. In the digital age, the battle between truth and illusion is ongoing. The illusory truth effect serves as a reminder of the vulnerabilities inherent in our cognition. It challenges us to question not only the information we receive, but also how often we encounter it. As you listen to this, consider the news articles, social media posts, or conversations you've heard multiple times. Are you certain all of them are truthful, or has repetition quietly woven its spell, making falsehoods seem like facts? In conclusion, the illusory truth effect is a striking example of how our minds can be subtly coerced into believing untruths. Its influence spans marketing, politics, law, and everyday life. By understanding this dark psychology fact, you gain a powerful tool to navigate a world full of noise and deception. Stay vigilant, question what feels familiar, and remember, truth is not defined by repetition, but by evidence and reason. Thank you for joining me as we uncover the hidden mechanics that shape our perception. Until next time, stay wise and sleep well. Contagious conformity. Just the phrase alone stirs something deep within us, a primal awareness of the invisible forces shaping our thoughts, choices, and behaviors. It's the subtle yet powerful current pulling individuals into the collective stream, compelling us to align with the group, often without even realizing why. Today, we dive into the dark, intricate world of contagious conformity, a psychological phenomenon that quietly dictates much of human behavior. Understanding it reveals unsettling truths about the fragile nature of free will and the profound influence of social dynamics. At its core, contagious conformity is the tendency of individuals to adopt the actions, beliefs, or attitudes of a group simply because others are doing so. It thrives on social pressure, the human need for belonging, and the avoidance of conflict or exclusion. What makes it truly compelling is its contagious nature. Like a silent infection, conformity spreads through crowds, workplace environments, online communities, and even intimate relationships, shaping minds and actions with little resistance. This is no mere accident. Our brains are wired to seek alignment with others. It's a survival mechanism from our evolutionary past, when standing united against threats meant life or death. But behind this seemingly innocent mechanism lies a darker psychological reality. When conformity runs unchecked, it can suppress individuality, encourage unethical behavior, and create environments ripe for manipulation. History is riddled with examples, from mass hysteria to blind obedience and atrocities, where contagious conformity played a central role. The shock of such events lies not just in what happened, but in how ordinary people like you and me became vessels for collective action that defied personal morals or logic. One of the most powerful experiments demonstrating this was Solomon Asch's conformity studies in the 1950 CES. Participants were placed in groups where Confederates deliberately gave wrong answers to simple visual tasks. Despite clear evidence, many individuals conformed to the group's incorrect consensus, sacrificing their own judgment. This was not an isolated case, it was a fundamental insight into the human psyche. The fear of standing out or being rejected often outweighs the drive to be correct or authentic. It's a trade-off our minds make without conscious deliberation. But why exactly does conformity spread like a contagion? It boils down to psychological mechanisms such as normative social influence and informational social influence. Normative social influence is the desire to be liked and accepted by others, prompting people to conform outwardly even if they disagree privately. Informational social influence occurs when individuals look to the group for guidance in ambiguous situations, assuming the majority must have accurate information. These forces combine, creating a self-reinforcing loop where one person's compliance signals social approval and encourages others to follow suit. In modern society, social media platforms act as fertile ground for contagious conformity. Algorithms amplify popular opinions, trending topics, and community norms, making dissent harder and the bandwagon effect stronger. We see this in viral challenges, political polarization, and even consumer behavior, where the appearance of consensus shapes what we think, buy, or support. The dopamine hit from likes and shares further entrenches conformity, hijacking our reward system and aligning it with group acceptance rather than independent thinking. But conformity is not always harmful. In many cases, it facilitates cooperation, harmony, and social order. The dark side emerges when conformity discourages critical thinking or ethical judgment. For example, in toxic work environments, employees may conform to unethical practices to fit in or avoid confrontation. Similarly, cults and extremist groups exploit contagious conformity to maintain control and suppress dissent, turning conformity into a tool of psychological manipulation. Understanding contagious conformity also means recognizing its subtle manifestations in everyday life. Have you ever found yourself agreeing with a group on something you privately doubted, just to avoid awkwardness? Or adopted a slang term, fashion trend, or political stance, simply because everyone around you did? These are small reflections of the same powerful forces at work. They reveal how deeply entrenched conformity is in our social fabric, often shaping our worldview more than we realize. Another unsettling aspect is how conformity can lead to the diffusion of responsibility, where individuals feel less personally accountable within a group. This phenomenon explains why people sometimes engage in harmful behavior collectively that they would never consider alone. Mob mentality, hooliganism, and online pile-ons all share roots in contagious conformity. As the group dynamic takes over, personal morals become overshadowed by the perceived consensus, and the line between right and wrong blurs. So how can we protect ourselves from the subconscious pull of contagious conformity? Awareness is the first step. Recognizing the subtle pressure to conform and questioning why we're adopting certain views or behaviors can help maintain a sense of autonomy. Cultivating critical thinking skills and surrounding ourselves with diverse opinions strengthens our resistance to social pressure. It's also important to develop the courage to stand apart, even if it means temporary discomfort or social exclusion. Psychological research suggests that having at least one ally sharing your perspective dramatically reduces conformity pressure. This sense of support emboldens individuals to maintain their independent judgment. Furthermore, reflective practices such as journaling or meditation can deepen self-awareness and help distinguish personal values from those imposed by the group. In addition, understanding the environments that foster contagious conformity allows us to navigate social landscapes more strategically. Online echo chambers, charismatic leaders, or highly cohesive groups increase conformity pressure. Being mindful of these factors equips us to make conscious choices about where and with whom we spend our time and energy. The study of contagious conformity lays bare the delicate balance between social harmony and individual freedom. It reveals how human nature is finely tuned to seek connection, yet vulnerable to losing itself in the process. This duality challenges us to remain vigilant, not only about the forces others exert on us, but also about the influence we unwittingly wield over others. In closing, contagious conformity is a potent reminder that our minds are not isolated islands, but fluid entities shaped by collective currents. It invites us to examine the boundaries between self and society, to question the origins of our beliefs, and to reclaim the personal agency that conformity threatens to erode. Ultimately, understanding this dark psychological fact empowers us to navigate the intricate dance of human connection with greater mindfulness and courage. Obedience to authority, a phenomenon so deeply ingrained in human behavior that it often defies our own moral compass. It is a silent puppeteer, pulling strings behind the scenes, compelling individuals to act against their own values simply because a figure of authority commands it. This dark corner of psychology exposes an unsettling truth. The power of authority can override empathy, conscience, and independent thought. Imagine a world where the words of a uniform, a badge, or a title do not just represent status, but hold a profound influence over minds. This influence can lead ordinary people down paths they never intended to tread. It's not just about fear of punishment or desire for rewards. It runs deeper than that. It taps into our social wiring, our need to conform, and our ingrained respect for hierarchical order. One cannot discuss obedience to authority without mentioning the groundbreaking studies conducted by Stanley Milgram in the 1960s. Milgram's experiments shattered illusions about human kindness and revealed how easily ordinary individuals could be compelled to inflict pain on others simply because an authoritative figure instructed them to do so. Participants, believing they were delivering real electric shocks, often went to extreme levels of voltage despite hearing the agonized screams of their victims. The chilling revelation was not just that people obeyed, but that the majority did. More than 60% of participants administered the highest shock levels simply because the experimenter told them to continue. This wasn't about cruel individuals. It was about the profound influence of authority on the human psyche. The study highlighted how individuals often abdicate personal responsibility when following orders, shifting blame onto the authority figure instead. But why are we so susceptible? The roots of obedience run deep. From childhood, we're taught to respect and obey those in positions of power: parents, teachers, police officers, and leaders. This social conditioning creates a mental framework where authority equals legitimacy. When confronted with commands, especially in structured, formal environments, many people switch off their critical thinking and comply. Dark psychology uncovers that this mechanism is not just passive obedience, but an active suppression of moral judgment. When told what to do, questioning authority can feel like rebellion, even dangerous. There is an inherent trust that those in power know better, that their directives serve a greater good. Unfortunately, this trust can be exploited by manipulative individuals or regimes seeking to control. Consider historical atrocities, such as those committed during wartime or under oppressive governments. These events often hinge on mass obedience, not blind cruelty. Ordinary citizens become cogs in a machinery of destruction, obeying orders under the guise of duty, loyalty, or fear. The psychological distance created by authority allows people to detach from the consequences of their actions, reducing empathy and moral responsibility. The concept of the agentic state helps explain this phenomenon. In this state, individuals see themselves not as responsible agents, but as instruments carrying out the wishes of authority. This shift absolves them of personal accountability, enabling behaviors that would normally be unthinkable. It is a dangerous mental surrender, where conscience is sidelined in favor of obedience. But obedience to authority is not a uniform or mechanical process. Its strength varies depending on factors such as proximity to the authority figure, the legitimacy of the authority, group pressure, and the victim's visibility. For example, studies show that people are more likely to obey commands when the authority is physically present and when the victim is depersonalized or distant. When face-to-face with the suffering caused by their actions, obedience often decreases. This insight offers a glimmer of hope, that awareness and empathy can counteract the pull of obedience. When individuals recognize the humanity of those affected by their actions, they are more likely to resist harmful orders. Encouraging critical thinking and fostering moral courage are essential steps towards breaking the cycle of blind obedience. Dark psychology also reveals the manipulative techniques authorities use to enforce obedience. These include incremental commitment, where individuals comply with small requests that gradually escalate to more severe actions. This foot-in-the-door tactic erodes resistance without triggering alarms. Similarly, dehumanization of victims makes it easier for followers to justify harmful behaviors as necessary or right. In today's digital age, obedience to authority takes on new forms. The anonymity and reach of the internet amplify both influence and conformity. Social media platforms often act as authority figures, dictating norms and behaviors through algorithms and community standards. This digital obedience can spread misinformation, reinforce echo chambers, and even foster toxic mob mentalities. Understanding obedience to authority is crucial not just for psychologists, but for every individual striving to maintain autonomy in a complex world. It challenges us to question not only those who command, but also our own tendencies to comply. Are we acting from personal conviction, or simply mimicking the voices of authority? The legacy of obedience to authority reminds us of the fine line between order and oppression, between discipline and submission. It is a call to vigilance, urging us to nurture independent thought, moral awareness, and the courage to stand against unjust commands. In the end, obedience is not just about power. It is about the fragile interplay between authority and conscience. Recognizing its dark psychological underpinnings helps us reclaim our agency and break free from the invisible chains of coercion. Power corrupts quickly. Power. It is often viewed as a prize, a symbol of success, control, and influence. But behind its alluring glow hides a darker truth. Power has an insidious way of warping the mind, bending values, and corrupting even the purest of intentions. In fact, power corrupts quickly, sometimes faster than we realize. Today, we will dive deep into the dark psychology of power, exploring chilling facts that reveal just how fragile our morality becomes when we sit in control. These are the truths few want to admit, but understanding them is crucial for anyone seeking to navigate a world shaped by power dynamics. From the ancient kings to modern leaders, the corrupting grasp of power is a timeless story. It's said that absolute power corrupts absolutely. But what does that really mean? It means that when people gain unchecked authority, the temptation to misuse that power becomes overwhelming. Neurological studies show that experiencing power activates the brain's reward centers, flooding us with dopamine. This chemical high creates addictive patterns, nudging us to seek more control, more domination. With every step deeper, the ability to empathize with others diminishes, and selfish motivations grow stronger. Imagine for a moment the psychological switch that flips when a person moves from being powerless to powerful. Suddenly, social rules that once felt important, fairness, kindness, respect, begin to blur. Research in psychology reveals that people with power exhibit increased narcissistic tendencies, often believing their rules don't apply to them. This cognitive bias, known as the power paradox, traps many leaders in a cycle where they become blind to their wrongdoing. They convince themselves that their actions serve a greater good, or are simply necessary, while in reality, their sense of morality erodes. Dark psychology uncovers even more unsettling facts about power's corruptive force. Power not only changes behavior, but alters perception. Those in power tend to overestimate their abilities and underestimate threats. This illusion of invulnerability leads to risky and unethical behaviors, embezzlement, exploitation, deceit, all justified by a growing sense of superiority. The infamous Stanford prison experiment is a haunting example. Ordinary people assigned roles of guards quickly abused their positions, humiliating and tormenting others within days. Power revealed a primal darkness buried beneath civility. Furthermore, power's psychological grip extends beyond the holder and infects entire systems. Groups led by corrupt leaders often develop toxic cultures where fear, manipulation, and silence become the norm. Subordinates adapt by suppressing dissent and promoting sycophancy, leading to a feedback loop that perpetuates corruption. Dark triad personality traits, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy thrive in these environments. Leaders with these traits exploit power to manipulate and control, leaving destruction in their wake. The speed at which power corrupts also depends on individual susceptibility. Some people succumb almost instantly, while others resist longer. But resistance is not necessarily about moral strength alone. Neurological and environmental factors play key roles. Stress, isolation, and temptation create perfect storms for corruption. Power isolates individuals, cutting them off from reality checks and genuine connections. Surrounded by yes men and shielded from criticism, they become more vulnerable to delusions of grandeur. Yet the story does not end in hopelessness. Understanding how power corrupts quickly is the first step toward controlling its dark influence. Awareness can serve as an antidote. Leaders who actively seek feedback, practice humility, and surround themselves with trustworthy advisors are less likely to fall prey. Psychological self-regulation techniques, mindfulness, and ethical training can strengthen the brain's ability to resist corruption. In history, some leaders have managed to wield power with remarkable restraint and integrity. These rare individuals demonstrate that power's corruptive force is not absolute, but such examples are exceptions, and their virtue often diminishes when faced with prolonged or absolute authority. This suggests that structures of accountability and checks and balances are essential for preventing corruption. Power must never be allowed to concentrate unchecked. Dark psychology research also shows how power's corrupting effects are amplified by a lack of accountability. Human beings are social creatures. When power holders face consequences for unethical actions, they are incentivized to behave better. Conversely, when corruption goes unpunished, it becomes normalized and spreads. This is evident in organizational scandals, political regimes, and even social groups where power abuses are swept under the rug. Another dark aspect is how power can desensitize individuals to the suffering of others. Neuroimaging studies reveal that powerful individuals show reduced activation in brain areas responsible for empathy. This neurological dulling enables cruel and exploitative behavior to occur without remorse. For example, corporate executives who make decisions that harm thousands may feel detached from the human cost. This disconnection can lead to systemic injustice disguised as business as usual. Moreover, power distorts moral reasoning. When people hold power, they often justify unethical acts by redefining the moral framework to suit their interests. This cognitive distortion, known as moral disengagement, involves minimizing harm, blaming victims, or diffusing responsibility. Leaders manipulate language and narratives to maintain their self-images as benevolent despite their wrongdoing. Such deceptive tactics entrench power further by masking corruption. One of the most chilling facts is how power corrupts social relationships. Rather than fostering genuine connections, power often leads to superficial interactions driven by control and manipulation. Trust erodes quickly, replaced by suspicion and competition. The powerful create hierarchies not only for order but for dominance, leading to social isolation even at the highest levels. This loneliness can exacerbate corrupt behaviors as the individual becomes increasingly detached from social norms. We must also consider the role of culture in the corruption of power. Some societies glorify domination, conquest, and hierarchy, reinforcing power's dark potential. Others emphasize communal values and checks on authority, reducing corruptive risks. Culture shapes our perceptions of power and influences who seeks it and how it is wielded. Understanding these dynamics helps explain why some environments breed corruption faster than others. Technology introduces a new dimension to power's corruptive influence. With digital platforms, those in power can manipulate information on a massive scale. Fake news, surveillance, and censorship become tools of control. The speed at which power corrupts is amplified by the reach and immediacy of technology. Leaders can suppress dissent and shape narratives with unprecedented efficiency, deepening their grip and accelerating moral decay. This leads to a sobering realization. Power's corruptive potential is deeply woven into human nature and society. It is not merely about individual character, but systemic vulnerabilities that invite abuse. Dark psychology teaches us to recognize these patterns, to be vigilant against the seduction of power. both within ourselves and others. In conclusion, the truth is unsettling. Power corrupts quickly because it taps into fundamental psychological drives: reward-seeking, dominance, and the need for control. It dulls empathy, fosters delusions, and undermines morality. Yet it is not an unstoppable force. Through awareness, accountability, and ethical vigilance, we can mitigate its dark influence. Remember, the moment we begin to crave power for power's sake, we step onto a dangerous path. The more power we hold, the greater our responsibility to guard against its corruptive pull. Emotional blackmail. Two simple words that pack an immense psychological punch. It's a silent weapon, a subtle form of manipulation that distorts trust and twists affection into something toxic. But what exactly is emotional blackmail? How does it operate beneath the surface of everyday interactions? And most importantly, how can you recognize it before it tightens its grip? Emotional blackmail is a dark psychological tactic used to control others by exploiting their deepest fears, vulnerabilities, and sense of obligation. Unlike overt threats, emotional blackmail is the quiet whisper in your ear that leverages your love, empathy, and loyalty against you. It isn't about physical harm, but about inflicting emotional pain so severe that it coerces compliance. When used effectively, it can bend your will without you even realizing you've been manipulated. At the heart of emotional blackmail lies fear. The fear of loss, rejection, guilt, or disappointment. The blackmailer exploits these fears by threatening to withdraw love, affection, or approval if their demands aren't met. Sometimes, the threat isn't verbalized. It's implied through cold stares, silent treatments, or pained expressions. This insidious way of manipulation keeps the victim constantly questioning themselves, trapped in a cycle of anxiety and submission. One of the defining features of emotional blackmail is its use of 4 fundamental tactics, often referred to as the 4 horsemen of manipulation: punishment, self-punishment, threatening abandonment, and appealing to guilt. Punishment involves direct or indirect threats, anger, criticism, or withholding affection to intimidate the victim. Self-punishment, however, is more subtle. The blackmailer might threaten to harm themselves emotionally or physically, implicitly or explicitly, if their demands aren't met. Threatening abandonment plays on the victim's fear of being alone, highlighting the possibility of rejection or loss if they don't comply. Lastly, appealing to guilt triggers deep-seated feelings of responsibility or blame, forcing the victim to act out of obligation rather than genuine desire. The dynamic between the blackmailer and the victim is one fraught with emotional turbulence. It's a complex dance of push and pull where the blackmailer seeks control and the victim struggles to reclaim autonomy. Inevitably, the victim feels manipulated, trapped in a web they can't easily escape. Yet, the very nature of emotional blackmail makes it difficult to identify because it often masquerades as concern, care, or even love. In relationships, whether between partners, family members, friends, or even colleagues, emotional blackmail can be devastating. It quietly erodes trust and self-esteem, leaving the victim doubting their own worth and judgment. It creates an imbalance of power that favors the manipulator and leaves the victim vulnerable and isolated. Over time, the emotional weight can become unbearable, leading to anxiety, depression, and a diminished sense of self. One chilling fact about emotional blackmail is how common it is. Studies suggest that nearly all adults have experienced some form of emotional manipulation in their lives. Despite its prevalence, many victims are reluctant to acknowledge what's happening because the manipulation feels intimately tied to people they care about. Denial and rationalization often serve as defense mechanisms, delaying recognition and response. Dark psychology insights reveal that emotional blackmail is not random but a learned behavior grounded in deep psychological needs: the need for control and the fear of abandonment. Manipulators often come from environments where power dynamics were skewed and emotional expression was weaponized. Understanding the origin of this behavior can foster deeper empathy, but it does not excuse the damage caused. The psychological impact of emotional blackmail can be profound and long-lasting. Victims frequently experience a loss of personal autonomy, feeling that their decisions are no longer their own but dictated by the fears and demands of others. This can lead to codependency, where the victim's identity and self-worth become entangled with pleasing the manipulator. The emotional exhaustion can sap motivation and create a chronic state of stress, much like walking on a psychological tightrope without a safety net. Recognizing emotional blackmail is the first step toward breaking free. Signs include feeling trapped or guilty for not meeting others' demands, noticing a pattern of threats disguised as love or concern, or sensing an inexplicable pressure to comply despite personal protests. It is important to differentiate between healthy emotional influence, which is reciprocal and respectful, and blackmail, which is coercive and one-sided. When confronting emotional blackmail, boundaries become indispensable. Setting clear, firm boundaries establishes a psychological barrier that protects autonomy. But be prepared, manipulators will often test these limits aggressively, using resistance as proof that they care or love you more deeply. This is a classic manipulation tactic designed to confuse and reassert control. Staying firm in your boundaries is an act of reclaiming power and self-respect. An effective response to emotional blackmail involves emotional detachment, or what psychologists call disengagement. It means refusing to engage with the manipulator's attempts to provoke guilt or fear. For the victim, this might require developing coping strategies such as mindfulness, journaling, or seeking external support. Emotional detachment is not cold-heartedness, it is a necessary defense to protect mental well-being. Seeking support is critical. Confiding in trusted friends, family members, or mental health professionals can provide validation and perspective, often obscured by the fog of manipulation. Therapy, particularly cognitive behavioral approaches, can help victims rebuild self-esteem, recognize unhealthy patterns, and develop assertiveness skills. Remember, you are not alone, and help is available. It is also vital to understand that sometimes the blackmailer is unaware of the damage they inflict. Distorted by their own fears and insecurities, they may believe that manipulation is the only way to secure love or attention. In some cases, genuine communication and therapy can mend relationships, provided both parties commit to change. However, when manipulation persists, protecting yourself must take precedence. In the age of technology, emotional blackmail has found new avenues to flourish. Text messages, social media platforms, and instant communication tools can become instruments of control and intimidation. The permanent and pervasive nature of digital messages means that the emotional weight can carry 24/7, leaving victims feeling monitored and powerless. Online emotional blackmail can include threats of public humiliation, exploitation of private information, or orchestrated guilt trips through curated social posts. Dark psychology teaches us that knowledge is power. By understanding the mechanics of emotional blackmail, its tactics and psychological underpinnings, we can begin to dismantle its influence. Awareness turns confusion into clarity and fear into empowerment. It reveals that emotional blackmail isn't an inevitable part of relationships, but a harmful distortion that can be challenged and overcome. Let's consider a common scenario. Imagine a partner who frequently threatens to leave unless their demands are met, then acts hurt or distant if things don't go their way. They might say things like, "If you really loved me, you would," or "I guess I'm not important to you." These phrases aren't statements, they are strategic weapons designed to trigger guilt and compliance. Recognizing these patterns allows the victim to respond differently, refusing to be coerced by emotional ultimatums. Emotional blackmail thrives on the victim's silence and confusion. It isolates, making the victim question their reality. That's why labeling the behavior is a vital step. Naming the manipulation demystifies the experience and shifts the power dynamic. It can also serve as a warning to others, preventing further exploitation. Another disturbing fact is that emotional blackmail doesn't always look dramatic. It can be subtle, coded in everyday conversations and gestures. A seemingly casual remark, "I'm just disappointed in you," can carry an unspoken threat. Or a sudden withdrawal of affection can create a vacuum that forces the victim to fix the relationship. These small, repeated acts accumulate, creating a potent psychological trap. Not all emotional blackmailers intend to harm. Some use these tactics unconsciously, repeating patterns learned from their past. However, intention does not absolve impact. The emotional damage remains, and the victim's well-being must remain the priority. So what practical steps can you take if you suspect emotional blackmail in your life? First, document incidents. Write down conversations, feelings, and outcomes. This helps clarify patterns and reduces self-doubt. Second, practice assertive communication. Use I statements to express your feelings without blaming, such as, "I feel uncomfortable when you say that." Third, cultivate a support network that validates your experience. And finally, do not hesitate to seek professional help. Therapists trained in trauma and abuse can offer tools to heal and strategies to navigate or exit manipulative relationships safely. Remember, emotional blackmail is a form of emotional abuse. You deserve respect, freedom, and authentic connection. As we close this exploration of emotional blackmail, consider the quiet power you hold. Understanding the psychology behind manipulation is a form of armor. It empowers you to see through deception and reclaim your emotional sovereignty. In the realm of dark psychology, knowledge isn't just enlightenment, it's survival. If you found this insightful, take a moment to reflect on your own relationships. Awareness is your first step toward emotional freedom. Thank you for listening, and be sure to take care of your mental well-being. Until next time, stay mindful and stay strong. Learned helplessness. It's a powerful psychological phenomenon that quietly controls lives, shapes minds, and traps countless individuals in invisible cages. Imagine facing obstacles again and again, a bitter cycle of failure and disappointment, until finally you stop trying altogether. That's learned helplessness in action. It's a state where people believe their actions no longer matter, where despair slowly erodes motivation, and where the will to change simply fades into nothingness. The concept of learned helplessness was first discovered in the late 1960s by psychologists Martin Seligman and Stephen Meyer. Their groundbreaking experiments with dogs revealed a disturbing truth about how creatures, human or otherwise, respond when subjected to unavoidable negative experiences. In these experiments, dogs were exposed to mild electric shocks they could not escape. Initially, the dogs tried to avoid the shocks, but after repeated failures, they gave up entirely. When later given the chance to escape the shocks, these dogs did not even try. They had learned to be helpless. What makes learned helplessness so terrifying is that it goes beyond animals. It strikes deep into the human psyche. When people experience repeated trauma, failure, or abuse, they may begin to believe that their efforts don't matter, that no matter what they do, they cannot influence their circumstances. This belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The victim stops fighting, stops seeking solutions, and instead accepts whatever grim reality they face. In everyday life, learned helplessness appears in countless subtle and overt ways. Consider a child who tries and fails at schoolwork repeatedly. Teachers and parents may label the child as lazy or unmotivated, further crushing the child's confidence. Eventually, the child internalizes this failure and stops trying, convinced that success is beyond reach. The same pattern emerges in adults. Someone stuck in a toxic job, feeling powerless to change their situation, or an individual in an abusive relationship who feels trapped and unable to break free. This phenomenon doesn't only affect behavior, it also shapes mental health profoundly. Learned helplessness has been closely linked to depression, anxiety, and feelings of worthlessness. When the mind believes that nothing one does has an impact, hopelessness takes root. The brain begins to anticipate failure and disengage from efforts to improve, fueling a vicious cycle of despair. Interestingly, learned helplessness can be subtle enough to go unnoticed, but its effects are devastating. It erodes resilience, suppresses creativity, and stifles problem-solving skills. People under the grip of learned helplessness may appear apathetic or indifferent, but beneath this facade lies a deep, lingering pain and frustration. It's a psychological prison built not of iron bars but of invisible beliefs. Understanding the mechanisms behind learned helplessness helps explain why it can be so difficult to overcome. At its core, this condition results from a perceived lack of control. When individuals repeatedly experience uncontrollable negative events, their brains form a cognitive pattern. I am powerless. This pattern alters how they interpret future events, making them less likely to act, regardless of whether control actually exists. Modern neuroscience supports this idea. Research shows that learned helplessness may involve changes in brain chemicals and neural circuits related to motivation and response to stress. Areas like the prefrontal cortex, which governs decision-making, and the amygdala, which processes emotions, behave differently in people experiencing deep feelings of helplessness. This could explain why breaking the cycle feels impossible for many without significant support. One of the darkest aspects of learned helplessness is how it can be weaponized in abusive relationships and manipulative environments. Abusers often deliberately cultivate helplessness in their victims, eroding autonomy and self-worth to maintain control. This psychological warfare ensures dependency and compliance. Victims come to believe escape is futile. They are trapped, not just physically but mentally. In workplaces, learned helplessness can appear as burnout or chronic disengagement. Employees who feel undervalued or powerless to influence their environment may develop a fatalistic attitude toward their roles, leading to reduced productivity and satisfaction. Organizations that ignore these signs inadvertently foster toxic cultures marked by fear and stagnation. But despite its grim implications, learned helplessness is not a life sentence. Awareness is the first step toward breaking free. Psychological interventions like cognitive behavioral therapy focus on reshaping the core beliefs fueling helplessness. By encouraging individuals to recognize their influence over outcomes, therapists help restore a sense of agency. Small victories matter a great deal. When a person begins to see that effort leads to change, no matter how minor, the mental shackles loosen. Empowerment replaces passivity. Gradually, motivation and hope return. Social support from friends, family, or support groups also plays a critical role in this recovery process. Education about learned helplessness is crucial. When people understand this psychological trap, they are better equipped to avoid falling into it or to assist others struggling within it. Schools, workplaces, and communities that foster autonomy, encourage problem solving, and validate efforts create protective environments against learned helplessness. Interestingly, some studies suggest resilience to learned helplessness varies among individuals. Factors such as genetics, personality traits, past experiences, and social support affect how likely one is to develop helplessness in the face of adversity. This means some people naturally bounce back faster, while others require more deliberate interventions. The pervasive impact of learned helplessness goes beyond individuals. On a societal level, populations experiencing systemic oppression, poverty, or discrimination may develop collective feelings of powerlessness. This shared helplessness stifles progress and makes societal change harder. Recognizing and addressing these dynamics is vital for social justice and collective well-being. If you pause to consider, learned helplessness is everywhere, sometimes hidden beneath layers of social interactions, cultural norms, and economic structures. It's the voice in your head whispering, "What's the point?" after too many disappointments. It's the invisible cage built from years of ignored struggles. So how can you protect yourself from falling into this trap? First, take ownership of small actions. Celebrate incremental progress. Each step forward weakens helplessness's grip. Second, surround yourself with people who uplift and support your growth. Isolation strengthens feelings of powerlessness. Third, challenge your beliefs when they drift toward hopelessness. Ask yourself, is this truly uncontrollable, or am I just afraid to try? Finally, if you find yourself deeply stuck, don't hesitate to seek professional help. Therapists, counselors, and mental health practitioners have tools designed to guide you out of learned helplessness and into empowerment. In the end, learned helplessness teaches a profound lesson about the human mind. It craves control, meaning, and hope. When deprived of these, it wilts. But with courage, knowledge, and support, anyone can reclaim their agency, break free from the shadows of helplessness, and step into a future shaped by their own hands. Of the pity play, we will delve into a subtle but powerful manipulation tactic, often hidden in plain sight: the pity play. It's a dark psychological strategy that plays on our deepest vulnerabilities, weaving emotional strings that pull us into compliance or sympathy, often without us even realizing it. In this script, we'll explore what the pity play is, how it works, why it's so effective, and the warning signs to watch for. Let's begin by understanding the basics. The pity play is a form of manipulation where someone deliberately evokes feelings of pity or sympathy to influence others. Unlike open aggression or direct demands, the pity play uses vulnerability as a weapon. Often cloaked in subtle cues like sad looks, heartbreaking stories, or self-deprecating remarks. This creates a psychological environment where the target feels compelled to help, forgive, or overextend themselves emotionally, economically, or socially. Why does it work so well? Humans are wired for empathy. Our brains are designed to recognize pain in others and respond, often instinctively. When someone appears to suffer or struggle, it triggers a cascade of biochemical responses. Oxytocin releases, calming us and encouraging pro-social behavior. The pity play exploits this innate tendency, hijacking our compassion for their gain. At its core, the pity play hinges on imbalance. The manipulator positions themselves as weak, vulnerable, or disadvantaged, while the target embodies strength, capability, or moral superiority for being the one who can save or help. This dynamic creates an addictive cycle for both parties. The victim role allows the manipulator to avoid accountability, while the helper role feeds the target's sense of importance and validation. Now, the pity play is often confused with genuine cries for help, but the key difference lies in intent and pattern. Genuine vulnerability seeks true connection or assistance, and usually includes a willingness to take responsibility or work towards change. The manipulator, however, uses sorrow or distress repeatedly and strategically, never fully overcoming their difficulties, thereby keeping others tethered to their dependency. Let's look at specific tactics used in the pity play. One common technique is the martyrdom act. Here, the manipulator exaggerates their sacrifices, making others feel guilty for what the manipulator has supposedly endured. This guilt becomes a tool to extract compliance or favors. Another tactic is the hopeless victim, where the manipulator paints a bleak picture of their future or circumstance, implying that the target's help is indispensable. This induces anxiety, fear, and a sense of obligation. There's also the subtle self-depreciation, a more indirect method where the manipulator downplays their own abilities or worth, effectively lowering expectations or inviting unsolicited support. This may be accompanied by sighs, downcast eyes, or a defeated demeanor, all designed to activate empathy circuits in the observer's brain. What makes the pity play even more insidious is its ability to blur boundaries. Victims of this manipulation find themselves overcommitting time, money, or emotional energy, often neglecting their own needs. The manipulator, aware of these effects, cycles through moments of apparent vulnerability and brief flirtations with independence, only to relapse into dependence when the target starts pulling away. Another psychological aspect to consider is emotional blackmail. When combined with the pity play, it becomes a potent weapon. The manipulator may imply that failing to respond with sympathy or assistance will cause them great suffering or worse. This plays on fear, guilt, and obligation simultaneously, cornering the target emotionally. The pity play can occur in many contexts: personal relationships, workplace dynamics, even social media. For example, in personal relationships, a manipulative partner might constantly portray themselves as the damaged party, never responsible for conflict, always the one who can't cope without the other. This traps the other person into being a caretaker, sacrificing their own well-being. In the workplace, an employee might use the pity play to avoid accountability, citing personal hardships to excuse missed deadlines or poor performance. Colleagues or supervisors, moved by empathy, may give preferential treatment or overlook faults repeatedly. Social media has amplified the reach of the pity play with public vulnerability. People craft narratives of hardship that solicit likes, comments, and emotional investment from online communities. Sometimes genuine, sometimes exaggerated or fabricated, these digital pity plays can evoke widespread sympathy, which can be weaponized to manipulate opinions or gain social status. Recognizing the pity play is crucial. It often begins with discomfort or a nagging feeling of imbalance. Why am I always the one giving? Why do I feel anxious or guilty about saying no? These emotional clues are the mind's way of alerting us to possible manipulation. Psychologically, the pity play correlates with traits seen in certain personality disorders, such as histrionic or borderline tendencies, where attention-seeking and emotional volatility are prevalent. However, it's important to remember that not all use of pity is pathological or manipulative. Context and pattern matter. Let's focus on the signs that someone might be employing the pity play. First, there's repetitiveness, a constant return to old problems, an avoidance of solutions, or refusal to accept help that would allow them to grow or recover. Second, there is a lack of reciprocity. The manipulator rarely or never reciprocates support. Third, the manipulator may respond negatively when you attempt to set boundaries, using guilt or sorrowful stories to pull you back. Another critical sign is emotional inconsistency. The manipulator will often switch between moments of vulnerability and small bursts of apparent control or independence, keeping the target emotionally off balance and more easily manipulated. How does one resist or exit the pity play? Setting clear emotional boundaries is paramount. This means recognizing your limits and protecting your time, energy, and resources. Practice saying no without guilt. It's not your job to fix every person's problems. Building awareness through reflection helps as well. Ask yourself, is the person taking responsibility for their circumstances? Are they seeking genuine solutions or merely emotional support? Are your efforts creating positive change or perpetuating a cycle of dependency? It's also valuable to distinguish between empathy and enmeshment. Empathy is feeling with someone briefly and supporting their journey. Enmeshment is losing yourself in another's emotional landscape to your detriment. The pity play thrives on enmeshment. Another coping strategy is emotional detachment, sometimes called compassion without attachment. You acknowledge the other's situation, but maintain an internal boundary that prevents emotional exhaustion. This doesn't mean being cold, rather, it's a balanced engagement where you don't lose yourself. When confronting a pity player, transparency helps. Express your observations calmly and clearly. For example, I notice you often express struggles, but I don't see steps being taken to improve things. How can I support you in ways that encourage growth rather than dependency? Keep in mind, some manipulators respond with denial, anger, or further emotional appeals. Being prepared for these reactions keeps you grounded. Let's consider psychological research related to this. Studies in social cognition show that pity activates not only empathy, but also a sense of duty in observers, making us more likely to offer help. However, prolonged exposure to manipulative displays of pity can lead to compassion fatigue, a state where one's ability to empathize diminishes due to overextension. This is a crucial warning. sustained involvement in a pity play can harm the helper's mental health, leading to burnout, anxiety, and depression. Therefore, self-care isn't selfish, it's necessary. There is also an element of learned helplessness often present in the pity play. The manipulator unconsciously or consciously adopts a mindset where they come to believe that effort is futile, reinforcing their victim role and further manipulating others. In some cases, the pity play intersects with gaslighting, another dark psychological tactic where the manipulator not only seeks sympathy, but also distorts reality, causing the target to question their perceptions or feelings. This can deepen the emotional control the manipulator holds. Let's explore an example. Imagine a friend who frequently complains about their life hardships, but never takes steps to improve their situation. When you try to point this out, they respond with tearful reminders of how much worse things are than you realize, effectively shutting down the conversation. Over time, you may find yourself drained, constantly trying to fix them, feeling guilty about setting limits, and anxious about their well-being. This is the pity play in action. In intimate relationships, this manipulation can be dangerously entwined with codependency, where one partner's need to rescue feeds their identity, while the other's need to be rescued feeds theirs, a cycle difficult to break without conscious intervention. How does culture influence the pity play? In some societies, expressing vulnerability openly is stigmatized, leading individuals to mask manipulation within subtle pity tactics rather than direct demands. In others, there may be an expectation to prioritize family or community support, making it easier for pity plays to be justified or overlooked. The rise of online communities has created new spaces for large-scale pity plays, such as crowdfunding campaigns with emotionally charged narratives or public figures sharing personal struggles for sympathy and influence. Here, the scale changes, but the psychological mechanisms remain similar. Before we end, it's important to mention that awareness of the pity play is not about becoming cynical or cold-hearted. It's about preserving your emotional health while still nurturing genuine empathy. Everyone deserves support, but not at the expense of your own well-being. Understanding these dark psychology facts equips you to recognize when pity is being weaponized and to respond in ways that protect both yourself and the manipulator's potential for real growth. No remorse, no regrets. Two phrases, simple in structure yet saturated with profound darkness. They echo in the minds of those who walk the shadows of human nature, the ones who navigate life without the comforting weights of guilt or sorrow. Today we delve into the disturbing world of those who possess no remorse and no regrets, individuals whose psyches operate beyond the normal boundaries of empathy and conscience. What does it truly mean to feel no remorse? At its core, remorse is a deep, painful feeling arising from the awareness that you have done something wrong. It's an internal alarm, a moral compass warning against harm caused to others. For many, remorse triggers change, empathy, and growth. But for some, this alarm is silent. These individuals carry a unique psychological makeup. They commit acts others view as hurtful or wrong, yet their minds remain untouched by self-condemnation. No guilt claws at their conscience, no regret gnaws at their heart. Instead, their actions are often calculated, detached, or even coldly indifferent. However, this psychological trait is not merely about stubbornness or defensiveness. It's about a fundamental difference in emotional processing. The absence of remorse and regret implies a disruption in the parts of the brain concerned with empathy and moral judgment. Neurologically, studies have shown reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala of such individuals, areas responsible for emotion regulation and moral reasoning. Imagine a person who, after causing deep harm to another, feels nothing resembling sorrow. Instead, they might feel empowered, justified, or even indifferent. This absence of remorse is common in antisocial personalities, but can also be found in narcissists, psychopaths, and sociopaths. These are individuals whose emotional range is constricted or manipulated in ways we find chilling. Let's talk about psychopathy, a term often misunderstood and sensationalized. Psychopaths are not just bad guys. They are cold, manipulative, and lack genuine emotional connections. A hallmark trait is their profound incapacity for remorse. They may express what seems like remorse, but it is often a performance, a mask designed to manipulate others and maintain control. No remorse means no internal deterrent. When a typical person considers harmful actions, they feel hesitation, fear, or guilt. Not so for the remorseless. For them, moral boundaries are blurred or irrelevant. This makes them dangerous. They can repeatedly harm without hesitation because their conscience remains silent. No regrets. Add another layer to this dark psychology. Regret is the backward glance, the mental replay of consequences and feelings, wishing things had been different. Without regret, these individuals live unburdened by the past, refusing to learn or change. Their path is linear and relentless, driven by present desires, often at the expense of others. Some argue that the absence of remorse and regret is a survival mechanism, an adaptive trait in harsh environments. For individuals exposed to trauma, neglect, or abuse, shutting down empathy may be a way to protect themselves. However, this protective shell can calcify into a permanent feature, isolating them emotionally and socially. The social implications are vast. People who lack remorse and regret can be charming, intelligent, and persuasive. They often climb social or professional ladders with ruthless efficiency. Their superficial charm masks a chilling lack of authentic emotional connection. Colleagues, friends, and even family may be unaware of the emotional void underneath. In relationships, this absence of remorse can be devastating. They may exploit, deceive, or emotionally abuse their partners without a hint of conscience. When confronted, they deflect, gaslight, or shift blame, leaving their victims trapped in confusion and pain. Their world is transactional. Others exist as pawns or tools, not as beings worthy of genuine care. The darkness of no remorse, no regrets is not just psychological, it is evolutionary. Empathy and remorse are generally advantageous for social species. They promote cooperation and trust. But in rare forms, their absence allows for cold calculation, dominance, and control. This duality is part of the complex tapestry of human nature. Consider the chilling words of some infamous figures who embodied this mindset. Their reflections are rarely about self-reproach, but about power, survival, or ideology. These words offer a window into the psyche where remorse is foreign and regret unnecessary. Understanding the neuroscience behind this absence helps demystify it. Functional MRI studies reveal that emotional processing areas light up differently or remain dormant in those without remorse. Psychologists have identified patterns of attachment disorders, early childhood trauma, and genetic predispositions that contribute to the development of such traits. But it's crucial to acknowledge that not all who exhibit a lack of remorse are dangerous criminals. Some operate quietly within society, controlling, manipulating, and exploiting without ever stepping into the light of remorse. They may become corporate leaders, politicians, or influencers, positions where empathy is often sacrificed for ambition. Yet there is a dark shadow to this power. No remorse and no regrets create a cycle, a feedback loop of self-justification. Each harm committed without consequence strengthens the internal belief that their actions are justified and necessary. Accountability becomes an external concept, irrelevant to their internal narrative. How do you protect yourself from individuals without remorse? Awareness is the first step. Understand the signs: persistent lying, lack of empathy, blame shifting, superficial charm, and manipulativeness. Trust your instincts when something feels off. Boundaries become essential shields, and when necessary, distance oneself to preserve emotional well-being. For society, acknowledging the existence of such personalities is vital. Interventions must be nuanced, combining psychological treatment, social awareness, and sometimes legal frameworks. Rehabilitation remains challenging when remorse, a cornerstone of change, is missing. Yet, progress is possible with targeted therapies, emphasizing emotional recognition and social responsibility. Reflecting deeper, the absence of remorse and regret forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about human morality. Are these qualities innate? Can they be learned or unlearned? How much of our behavior is driven by biology versus environment? In literature and film, these characters fascinate us because they reflect a part of ourselves we fear, the capacity to numb ourselves from pain and responsibility. Yet, it is precisely this fear that keeps empathy and conscience alive in most of us. No remorse, no regrets, is a chilling reminder of what happens when that balance is broken. Preying on the kind-hearted. In a world filled with kindness and compassion, there lurks a shadowy underside. Beneath the surface of goodwill and generosity, some individuals expertly exploit these very traits. They thrive in the shadows, feeding off the empathy and trust of those who are most willing to give, most eager to help. This is the unsettling truth about preying on the kind-hearted. Kindness, at its core, is a profoundly human quality. It connects us, creates bonds, and fosters communities. Yet this beautiful trait has a darker side, one that dark psychology reveals with chilling clarity. Certain individuals are uniquely skilled in identifying and manipulating the kind-hearted. They use their understanding of human emotion, vulnerability, and trust as weapons, turning warmth into weakness. These manipulators, often called emotional predators, are experts in dark psychology. They understand the psychology of kindness. They know exactly how to trigger the altruistic instincts hidden within many of us. By doing so, they override rational thought and exploit trust for their own gain. This exploitation is subtle, often invisible to those caught in its grip. One of the most disturbing facts in dark psychology is how easily kindness can be weaponized. Think about it. Kindness involves lowering our defenses, opening ourselves emotionally, and sometimes placing others' needs above our own. Manipulators exploit precisely this tendency. They approach with stories of hardship, feigned innocence, or manufactured vulnerability. They present themselves as victims, hoping to ignite the helper instinct buried deep in the kind-hearted. Once engaged, the psychological trap tightens. The manipulator carefully nurtures a sense of obligation. The kind-hearted feel compelled to help, sometimes repeatedly. Each favor extracted chips away at their emotional reserves, while the predator gains more control. At some point, the kindness that once flowed freely becomes a tether, tying the victim to manipulation. This dynamic often leads to a disturbing cycle. The kind-hearted individual, motivated by empathy, repeatedly gives, while the manipulator continuously takes without remorse or gratitude. As the emotional price mounts, the victim may begin to feel confused, drained, and even guilty for their growing doubts. This is a hallmark of psychological manipulation. Dark psychology teaches us that preying on the kind-hearted is not random, it is a calculated process. Manipulators are skilled at spotting vulnerability and weakness, but more importantly, they are masters of creating manufactured weakness. They play on insecurities and fears, amplifying a victim's sense of inadequacy or compassion. In some cases, they fabricate crises or exaggerate problems to keep the kindness flowing. One chilling fact is that manipulators often mirror kindness initially. They can be charming, empathetic, and supportive, which draws in their target. This initial mimicry serves to establish trust and lowers suspicion. It also reinforces the kind-hearted person's belief that they are needed and appreciated. But this facade masks deeper, often sinister motives. Emotional predators also understand the power of guilt in manipulating the kind-hearted. Guilt is an incredibly effective tool because kindness often comes with an internal moral compass, an inner voice telling us to help, to do good, to care. Manipulators exploit this by making their victims feel responsible for their suffering or problems. They create a false narrative where kindness feels less like a choice and more like an obligation. Another dark psychology fact is the role of isolation in these manipulative relationships. Predators often work to isolate their victims from other sources of support, friends, family, or colleagues who might see through the deception. This isolation makes the kind-hearted person more dependent on the manipulator and less able to seek help or perspective. Gradually, their world narrows until the manipulator's influence dominates completely. It is important to recognize that preying on the kind-hearted is not limited to romantic relationships or friendships. It can happen anywhere: workplaces, social groups, charitable organizations, even random encounters. Because kindness is so universally valued, these emotional predators have a wide pool to choose from. They often target people who are naturally empathetic, generous, and trusting. Interestingly, many kind-hearted individuals do not see themselves as vulnerable. Their confidence in their own judgment and goodwill can sometimes blind them to red flags. They may dismiss warning signs, rationalize mistreatment, or attribute harmful behavior to stress or misunderstanding. This cognitive dissonance is another reason why manipulation can persist unchecked for so long. What makes this even more traumatic is the betrayal of trust. For someone who values kindness highly, being preyed upon by an emotional predator is deeply wounding. It shakes their faith in people, in their judgment, and sometimes even in themselves. This emotional aftermath can lead to a profound sense of isolation, self-doubt, and emotional exhaustion. Dark psychology also teaches us that awareness and education are among the best defenses against being preyed upon. Recognizing the patterns of manipulation, understanding the psychological tactics involved, and maintaining healthy boundaries can protect the kind-hearted from becoming victims. Knowledge empowers kindness to remain a strength rather than becoming a vulnerability. One common tactic used by manipulators is known as love bombing. This is especially prevalent in romantic or close personal relationships. The manipulator showers the victim with praise, affection, and attention early on, creating an intense emotional bond quickly. This overwhelming positive reinforcement feels intoxicating to the kind-hearted and blurs their ability to recognize underlying manipulation. Over time, love bombing gives way to control and emotional abuse. The initial kindness is replaced with demands, criticism, or passive-aggressive behavior masked as concern. The victim, still hoping to reclaim the earlier warmth, often endures this cruel shift, driven by the hope that kindness will return. This cycle of intermittent reinforcement is a classic dark psychology technique, keeping victims hooked on the promise of kindness even as they are hurt. Manipulators also exploit the kindness of their victims financially. Many scams and frauds rely on preying on generous people who simply want to help someone in need. Stories of stolen inheritance, medical emergencies, or business troubles are common ploys. The kind-hearted feel compelled to help, sometimes giving far beyond what is reasonable or safe. Beyond individual predators, entire groups or organizations can prey on kindness. Cults, for example, often target empathetic individuals with promises of community, purpose, and love. These groups use intense psychological pressure to control their members, exploiting kindness to enforce conformity and submission. Recognizing these dynamics is critical for protecting oneself from collective forms of manipulation. It is worth noting that being kind and setting boundaries are not mutually exclusive. In fact, boundaries are essential tools for protecting kindness from being exploited. Healthy kindness involves recognizing when to say no, when to step back, and when to seek help. Without boundaries, kindness can become a doorway to chronic manipulation and emotional harm. Sometimes the kind-hearted suffer quietly. They may not share their experiences out of shame, fear of judgment, or disbelief that they could be manipulated. This silence allows predators to continue their cycle unchallenged. Breaking this silence through awareness, conversation, and support networks is vital for resilience and recovery. Another subtle tactic used by emotional predators is gaslighting. This involves distorting reality to make the victim doubt their own perceptions and feelings. When the kind-hearted begin to question themselves, they become easier to control. Gaslighting erodes self-trust, making escape from the manipulative relationship more difficult. Dark psychology also points to the role of empathy fatigue in victims. Continual giving, especially to exploitative individuals, can drain emotional energy to dangerous levels. Empathy fatigue leads to burnout, depression, and loss of the very compassion that once defined the kind-hearted person. Recognizing and preventing empathy fatigue is crucial for mental health. Understanding that manipulation rarely comes with obvious signs can help the kind-hearted remain vigilant. Predators are often subtle, patient, and persistent. Their methods are slow and insidious, allowing manipulation to grow gradually. This slow progression often makes the abuse less visible, not only to others, but to the victims themselves. The importance of self-awareness and emotional intelligence cannot be overstated. Developing a clear understanding of one's own emotional boundaries, triggers, and values can act as an internal guard against predatory manipulation. Kindness, guided by strong self-awareness, becomes a shield rather than a vulnerability. It is also important to foster communities that value and protect kindness without enabling manipulation. Supportive environments can provide perspective, validation, and assistance, making it harder for emotional predators to isolate and exploit individuals. Collective vigilance is a powerful antidote to dark psychology's predation. For those who have experienced exploitation because of their kindness, recovery involves rebuilding trust in oneself and in others. Therapy, support groups, and education about dark psychology can provide the tools needed to heal. Importantly, reclaiming kindness as a strength, not a weakness, is often an essential part of this journey. In conclusion, kindness is a precious human quality that deserves protection. It is a source of connection, healing, and hope. Yet, as dark psychology reveals, it can also be exploited by those who prey on the good in others. Recognizing this reality is not a call to cynicism, but to cautious empowerment. By understanding the tactics of emotional predators, by setting boundaries, and by fostering self-awareness, the kind-hearted can maintain their strength and resilience. In a world that sometimes feels dark, kindness remains a beacon, a light to guide us. But like any light, it must be guarded carefully, lest those shadows seek to extinguish it.